session. This is session 3 and the first session for this day. Its topic is enabling sustainable development. Sustainable development is the development that meets the needs of present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Sustainability is a societal goal that broadly aims for humans to safely coexist on Earth over a long period. So we have a distinguished speakers for this session, which will be chaired by Dr. Pushpa Kumar, Dr. Pushpam Kumar, sorry. And I would like to introduce Dr. Pushpam Kumar. He is a senior economic advisor at UNEP. He has been instrumental in designing, implementing, and providing leadership to the operationalization of the concept of natural capital through flagship projects like Vantage, the valuation and accounting of natural capital for green economy, and culminating in a resolution of natural capital passed through UNEAE 2. Sir, now you can start the session and you may invite the speakers to present their. Thank you so much. Yeah, please. Or I think you can switch on from there. Oh, it's better. Yeah, please, please.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the kind, introductions. Very happy to be here, and namaskar, good morning to everyone, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are online, people. So we have 90 minutes, and we have 7 presenters. So broadly, we will keep 10 minutes for each presentations. So that we have at least 20 minutes for question and answer. That is what the plan looks like. So with that, what I would like to, I can see that the papers in these sessions are very, very diverse, coming from different kind of disciplines and theme, but nonetheless, there is a common thread that the papers indicate or provide guidance, or at least promise to provide guidance on how to enable sustainable development, or how to enable sustainability. So that is good. But then, as I said, papers are quite diverse in character and nature. Let me confess, I have not read those papers. I have just read the abstracts. With that, I think I would like to move to a brief presentation on the theme which I wanted to share with you. And that is about what we call it to share with you. Okay, we are trying to arrange to share the PowerPoint with you. So colleagues online, have patience, please. Okay.
No, okay.
Maybe I can remove this because this.
Side में कर दो, कहीं ठीक.
Thank you very much. So the theme which I'm going to share with you as my presentation is enabling sustainable development through moving beyond GDP. When we talk about sustainable development, there is a standard definition where we talk about not to compromise the prospect of future generations about their well-being and their welfare. And that, in terms of economics, simply means that we have to maintain the stock of wealth as much as we have inherited from our forefathers. And that means that whenever we talk about progress and sustainability and well-being, let's not be blind and buying to only GDP or income, which is very popular, but it has limitations in saying anything meaningful about sustainability. There is a literature, it is now kind of conclusive that GDP or GDP per capita, which Ashok was also referring, Ashok Khosla in his plenary talk, we have to move beyond this GDP. Now, what is the context? I mean, there can be numerous contexts coming from the policy, national perspective, global bodies, some of the science and policy evidences and initiatives, but I will pick up few of them, not all. It's a very big list. The Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, has come ahead to the member states, including India. That document is called Common Agenda, our Common Agenda, and in that common agenda, there are different recommendations. One of them is that we need to move beyond GDP. And in fact, the Secretary General of the United Nations is very vocal, and he wants to take it to each of the country and request them to move beyond GDP. So that is our common agenda, but also within UN systems, there is a core group to consider the alternatives to the GDP. Then, of course, there are individual governments who have been talking about it. For Sarkozy government in France, Stiglitz, Amartya Sen, and Fitoussi, they talked about it, and then Stiglitz was very shrill in his voice that this GDP is no good. Recently, for UK government, the National Treasury of UK, HM Treasury, constituted an independent study which was led by Indian-British economist Parthadas Gupta, Sir Parthadas Gupta, and they also came out with a strong recommendation endorsed by the Royal British Academy and 10 Downing Street that GDP alone is not good and we need to move towards wealth per capita rather than GDP. So sustainability requires many things, but coming from a perspective of economic science, few basic principles immediately comes to our mind when we talk about what we need to do in order to implement or operationalize sustainability. Number one, we need to measure the nature's contribution to the social system. We also need to know what is the stock or production base. So it is not only the flow, the income, which we always talk, but it is the basis of that income on that we need to know. And that means wealth of all types, including human capital, which Ashok was referring that the rate of return on the children education or the girls' education is maximum. And that makes huge sense. Natural capital, and of course produced capital, that is the manufactured capital. So all these three types of capital must be assessed and measured. Trade-offs, you will find that there are invariably trade-offs across different kind of capitals, and we must recognize where is the trade-offs and how to resolve them. By the way, they are the requirement for sustainability. Again, and knowing the assets analogous to the assets of the business firms. I mean, business firms are very smart. They do annual stock taking of their wealth, but nations don't. I mean, we do have some kind of estimates, but they do not talk much about natural capital or human capital and how they are changing from year to year. Unless we know that, there is no way to track down sustainability and the progress. Everything will remain a slogan, and that will be hard to act upon. Again, when we talk about sustainability measurement, or wealth measurement, there is a rich traditions in economics and science, starting since World War II. Simon Kuznets, Hicks, Samuelsons, those of you who are from development side would know that many of them are very familiar name. They are Nobel laureates. They are well-established name in the profession. They have been raising voice that we need to measure wealth, not income alone. And then if you talk about the multilateral trust fund like the bank or the UN agencies or Asian Development Bank and national treasuries and planning, they have been talking about this, including a Stockholm Plus 50, which happened in June a few months back in Stockholm to celebrate what Ashok was referring, 1972. And there also they reiterated that the way we are measuring sustainability, we need to change and we need to move beyond GDP. We need to measure wealth. So let's come to the more operational part. When we say what is the wealth, so wealth is, as I said, natural, human, and produced capital. That is the base for income and sustainability. I will not go to this because I thought there is a very good theory which tells you that if wealth per capita goes up, sustainability has better chance, or sustainability is there. Sustainability in terms of welfare of the future generation. And if the net wealth per capita is declining, you are in trouble. So final, the sustainability will basically require that we must know the change in wealth per capita. And if those of you who have further interest, they can see I have given you the reference, the 2018 report of UNEP, Inclusive Wealth, and now the next report is coming very, very soon, where you have wealth of the nations for 163 countries for last 27 years, and all three types of capital. So that you can see. And by the way, they're not just a physical capital, they are monetized value. So they are based on the accounting price. So it is reasonably okay done, and you can have a look. I mean, keep watch your watch informations or write to me. I am happy to provide you more information. But I'm happy to share with you some of the findings which I said from 1991 to 2019, which is basically 27, 28 years. See this graph carefully. And on the x-axis, you have the time. On the y-axis, you have the percentage growth. You will find it that see this difference. GDP per capita is on rise, produced capital per capita on rise, inclusive wealth per capita is on rise, human capital per capita is on rise, natural capital per capita is on decline. So there is a trouble there. The trouble is that we are amassing wealth of all types, computer, machine, building, equipments, maybe at the cost of natural capital. And that is the trade-off. And that we need to fix. So this is latest for 163 countries, all the data from UN, the bank, and FAO. So when we analyzed, we found that 58 of 140 countries, they experienced positive growth in wealth, but the rest of the guys are doing very, very bad. That means they are compromising with sustainability target. So they are eating away the wealth and treating those wealth as income, which is very, very bad. It compromises the prospect of the future generation to not only meet their demands, but also their consumptions and well-being in their own time frame. Of course, this graph tells you that where is the problem. It gives you georeferential data that where are the problem sites. But the other aspect is, I don't know whether you can see them. So on the x-axis here is inclusive wealth per capita, and on the y-axis is GDP per capita. Interesting finding is that it is possible that you are doing very good on GDP, but the wealth is negative. That means basically you are mixing income with wealth. That is very bad for sustainability again. The empirical data shows that. So, what inclusive wealth basically does? It tracks triple planetary crises, whether it is climate, pollution, and biodiversity. It makes restoration financially justifiable. And as you know, we are in the even decades of restorations. Uh, this measures the wealth. If you take the wealth as your measuring rod, then it can really help you in analyzing and designing policy between the planetary crisis and human health issues. Like we are in Delhi, I don't know what is the official positions, but we all know that pollution is a problem. Groundwater is a problem. Then other types of, the plastic is a problem. Solid waste is a problem. Now, if you take the wealth part and natural capital, you can analyze those issues much more better and effective way than otherwise. It also enables implementation of circular and green economy, and it helps implementing sustainable consumption and production because it brings new perspective and new insights on weak and strong sustainability. I'm leaving this. If somebody has question, I will be happy to. Now, so what we need to do, that's the last slides. What we need to do that we need basically, yep, engagement with financial institutions, national treasuries, and the development sectors, because these are the guys who need to understand the relevance and role of the wealth and the capitals. They know it, but they must know about natural capital. We need to pilot lots of studies to create data on natural capital. So piloting beyond GDP in selected countries and region would certainly help. And of course, a country like India, if India takes a lead in that, it will be for others to follow in the region and beyond. And finally, we will have to develop a strong community of practitioners through capacity development, data exchange, informations, lessons learned from each other. And that is where a meeting like this can be helpful. I think I will stop here and how do you plan? Do you think we can take the question after each presentations? Yes, so the organizers advise us to keep your question closer to your chest. And when we are done with all the presentation, we will open the floor and then we can discuss. But don't forget your question. Keep your question and we'll come back to you. May I request our next presentation from our colleague from IRMA? Are you ready? Okay. Please.
Yes, I'm ready.
Mr. Nathan? Yeah, Mr. Nathan is a professor at Institute for Rural Management in Anand, Gujarat, a premier institution of Government of India working on rural development, livelihood, and range of development issues. So it will be very nice to hear from Mr. Nathan. So over to you, Mr. Nathan. You have 10 minutes.
मैंने खोली नहीं थी अभी.
No. Okay. Just one minute.
Very good morning to all of you. I hope I'm audible to all the participants who have joined online. Thank you, Dr. Pushpam Kumar, for the kind introduction, and thank you, TIFAC and Aisha, for this wonderful opportunity to interact with all of you with a topic which is, social transformation and social justice for enabling sustainable development. This particular topic I'm going to address through two basic questions. When you talk of sustainable development, it is what development and whose sustainability. Of course, Pushpamji has already introduced that development need not be and must not be seen from the narrow view of economic dimensions where development is measured through monetary units. Development can be seen as something where you talk about providing basic access and services to the satisfaction of basic needs of all people. So this is something like the GDP might grow, but the fruit of that economic development, whether it is reaching people. I mean, one can see development from that perspective. Development also can be seen from the perspective of social modernization. In our country, for example, we keep hearing there are still pockets where there are honor killing, there are dowry deaths, there are domestic violence. So in that case, we might have materially developed, but the caste system we carry, the various other prejudices we carry, we say we are in a medieval mindset. So the idea of development, we might say that we have grown in terms of infrastructure, in terms of buildings, in terms of wealth, the wealth which Pushpamji was mentioning. But then we also need to have a liberal outlook. So development also can be seen from as the penultimate point in the slide says, from the Amartya Sen's ideas of capabilities, which will deliberate slightly more as the expansion of freedom. Because as we know, in a conventional notion of development, human beings are considered as means to production. It's like an input to the development process. But the theory of capability approach and human development for the first time brought in the idea that the human beings can be the end in development, in the sense you call a society to be developed, the society which has healthy human being, knowledgeable human being, or human being who are able to lead a decent standard of life. Just to bring home the point that development can be seen in a multitude perspective, I would like to bring out the example of three children fighting for a flute, which was famously given by Professor Amartya Sen, where the child A says, I am the one who knows how to play the flute, so I want to have it. Child B says, I don't have any other toy to play, so therefore I should have it. Child C says, I am the one who made this flute, therefore I should have it. Suppose these three children quarreling over a flute come to you, and you are the decision maker. Whom do you give the flute to? I mean, if I want to ask whosoever is physically present here, the situation is you and three children are fighting for the flute. Child A says, I'm the one who knows how to play it, because flute is, after all, when it is played, it adds its value. Child B says, I don't have any other toy to play. And child C says, I am the one who made it. So whom do you give the flute? You cannot keep it for yourself. So you have to hand it over to one of the children. So whom do you give? Any idea? So who do you give to who of you would give to child A? Anybody, sir? So yeah, I mean, because we have paucity of time, I don't want to make it really thoroughly interactive, but here the idea is, I mean, if you even experiment with this small audience, I have experimented with PhD students of maybe 5 or 6 people, we always get a divided house. The idea is the people who are utilitarian in their approach, they would go for child A, who basically knows how to play the flute. The people who are egalitarian in their approach would go for child B, who basically wants a more equitable society. And the people who are libertarian in the approach, in the sense of Marx, that the fruit of labor should go to the people who have worked for it, would go for child C. The idea is the same situation, as you can see. I mean, it is the brilliance of the Sen to come out with a beautiful example where you see people can come from different schools of thought or different ideas of development. Now, once we talk about human development, as I was mentioning, where the expansion of freedom is something which is critical, and in the sense we say that the more money or the economic wealth is basically one of the means to this expansion of freedom. So instead of focusing just one of the means, it is better idea to actually focus on the ends, where we talk about expansion of freedom or removal of unfreedoms. That is basically inability to satisfy hunger, the various unfreedoms human beings suffer through, inability to treat for illness, inability to be adequately clothed, inability to have clean water, inability to have the social arrangements, and denial of political and civil rights. So these removal of this freedom is basically our end goal. So our focus should be towards that, where money or the economic wealth is just one of the means, but not the central goal. So that's how we have conceptualized, particularly UNDP is credited with coming out with annual human development reports, where they basically rank countries not only in terms of income, but a composite index, which most of us know, Human Development Index, and that's a composite index of health, education, and ability to lead a decent standard of living, proxied by income. So if we see, the idea of development, of course, there are contested ideas, but capability or capacity is very beautifully placed. In fact, Sen and his colleagues introduced this particular block, as you see in this slide, the second block. Earlier, it was conceived that the resources generally translate to action, and action gives us happiness. But then the capacity to translate resources to action is extremely critical. Of course, you can see societal development through resources, but then that is not probably the correct way to look through, because suppose I will just give a simple example. Suppose you have a bicycle, but only when you know how to ride it, how to balance it, you would be able to make use of the resources. So capacity is more critical than the resources itself. Similarly, actions. So you compare two people, one person is starving vis-a-vis one person is fasting. There is, though the action is same, action of not having the food, but there is a huge difference between the two people, because one is doing it voluntarily, who is fasting, vis-a-vis the other who is actually forcefully doing, because he or she has lost the capacity or the capability to arrange food for himself or herself. So therefore, capacity and capability is again critical. If you look from utility point of view, people actually say, let us look for the satisfaction or happiness point of view. I think that is also not correct. The human development and capability theorists would say that is not probably the most appropriate block to focus on, because if you ask a political activist who has been imprisoned for years, you ask the state of mind, they maybe say we are at the best state of mind. I'm in ultimate happiness because I'm going to achieve, I'm in the pursuit of achieving what is my goal, that is freedom for my country, for example, right? But then if you think from that person's, that point in time, the kind of constraints, the kind of unfreedom the person goes through is cannot be ignored. The unfreedom of mobility, unfreedom of freedom of socialization. I mean, those kind of things have been curtailed for the person. So it is always a good idea to focus on capability. So that is my first point, that which is a broad normative framework for assessment of individual well-being and social arrangements. Now, when I'm asking whose sustainability, I'm just completed the first part, that is what development. I'm asking about whose sustainability. I want to bring one example, the development induced, displacement induced development, We know that in our country also and all over the world, when large infrastructural project happens, people get displaced. I mean, this is something which happens through government acquiring land or finally transferring that land to the industrialists, and there can be involuntary surrender of land. So that basically the displacement of people, and that actually lead to lot of vulnerabilities. We know loss of land, loss of job, homelessness, marginalization, food insecurity, social disarticulation, etc., etc. I mean, basically people are uprooted. So it is not a demographic phenomenon. It is basically a economic, social, and an environmental phenomenon of displacing people. But if we see who have been displaced in our country, okay, if you look at the statistics, though scheduled tribe population only constitute 8% of our total population, they constitute more than 50% of the total displaced people. It is not that the people who are high in the social strata or high in the economic strata are the people who are getting displaced. Even if, for example, you get a coal mine, I'm just saying hypothetically, under the soil of the Delhi, you are not going to displace the high profile people of Delhi just because you got a mine below the soil of the Delhi. I mean, you are going to displace people only who are voiceless. So when we're talking about social justice and social transformation of enabling sustainable development, what is happening is, while we are saying about taking care of the environment, which our chair quite emphatically put in, but then there is something missing in this sustainable development. Sustainable development stands on the three pillars, as we know: economic, social, and environmental. So in the pursuit of sustainable development, if we see who gains, are typically the people. They are making the development sustainable for the higher class people, whereas it is the politically and economically voiceless people, the marginal people, who might get subsequently marginalized more. Yes, because if you have for example, a hydro plant being installed in a particular remote location and the electricity is being evacuated and supplied to well of people, then obviously the place from which you are getting the electricity sometimes are deprived of electricity. So basically what is happening is there is an imbalance, and this is something which, this is not that I am speaking or very few of the people are speaking. This is originally conceived in the notion of sustainable development. I mean, the first international report, which I'm sure my chair would know, that the International Union Conservation Nature 1980 report of World Conservation Strategy has these two pictures. I could not resist putting these two pictures. The picture on the left is very well understood and people talk about it, that humans gradual encroachment to nature, so natural wealth must be preserved. And when actually Brundtland Commission said about that the future generation, which also our chair also spoke about, the future generations aspirations to be ensured, basically we are talking about environment, or keeping the environment intact so that future generation, there is more equity across the generation. But what we forgot in the process is the intragenerational equity, and which also sustainable development talks about. When IUCN report has this picture on the right, which is where they equate one Swiss with 40 Somalis, they're basically talking about the inequality in the society. So a society which is unequal, a development which is bringing more inequality in the society, cannot be sustainable. So this is something which you need to keep it in mind, and that is applicable within a generation. We don't need to go even to the next generation to find that. I mean, of course, this is quite inbuilt in the concept of Ubuntu. If you talk about solution, I will just put one philosophical solution, which is age-old, which is the Ubuntu philosophy, which says that we believe that the person is a person through other persons, that my humanity is cut off, bound off inextricably with yours. When I dehumanize you, I inexorably dehumanize myself. And you might know Ubuntu philosophy of Africa, where a Westerner who visited Africa, when he was leaving, he put certain number of candies behind a tree and asked people to, asked children to make a race so that the first one will get the candies. But then what the children did, most of us might know, they actually held each other's hand and they reached the tree all together and shared the candies. When the Westerner asked, why didn't you compete and why didn't you win? Because he knew that there was a girl who is good at race, but the girl replied, how could I have been happy if my friends would have been sad? So I am because we are is something which we need to philosophically consider. Just one example I will give and end. If you talk about energy, I mean, which the area which I do research on, with energy efficiency, we are making our system more and more efficient every day. Our production, our transmission of electricity, our consumption is becoming more and more efficient. All their lights which you use in this hall, all the systems, electronic appliances are becoming more and more efficient. When you talk of efficiency, the whole idea was efficiency would lead to less input resources, but that has not happened. Though the systems are becoming more and more efficient, we actually expected an inverted U, that efficiency will take over and the input consumption will fall later on. But what has actually in reality has happened is a straight U. The consumption keeps on increasing. And this is happening because there are two reasons. One is the rebound effect, what we call in the energy literature rebound effect. Once we use more efficient appliances, for example, I am using a 5-star TV or 5-star refrigerator, what has changed? Can somebody guess? The thing which has changed is the size of the TV or the size of the refrigerator. Using a more efficient device, that's many energy efficiency improvements do not reduce energy consumption by the amount predicted by simple engineering models, because such improvements make energy services cheaper, so consumption of those services increases. So we don't have just one light now. As you can see, this room has probably 50 lights, okay, because we are using an efficient lighting system. So this is something which I want to say, that something which can be connected to sufficiency. I mean, as we have efficient star system by Bureau of Energy Efficiency, we should have sufficiency star. Smaller TVs should be available in a much relatively cheaper rate. There should be a sufficiency star. Somebody who is using finally less input energy by having smaller system should be given the due credit, not just the efficient system, because your most efficient system may be a very large sized car, which you may drive also more because it is fuel cheap and it making you drive more, which is basically leading to some kind of rebound effect, as also some kind of conspicuous consumption, which is leading to, at the end of the day, more energy. So this is something which is connected to degrowth, which has been a recent conception and which is gradually coming into fore, but I think that we need to have more policies towards the same. I will end it here. I will take up maybe the, few more discussion when the questions comes. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nathan. And then I think, as we did in the earlier presentation, we'll request to keep the questions for the time being, and we move to the third presentation. I don't know whether our colleagues who are online can hear me, but may I request Dr. Ansu Ogra. Ansu, are you online?
Yes, I am online, and I'll just switch
Dr.
on.
Ansu Ogra.
Yes, hello.
From
Can you hear
King's
me?
College, London.
Can you hear me? Hello.
Any technical support so that we can, link with Ansu?
And everyone.
Really? Hi, Dr. Ansu Ogra, are you there?
Yes. Yes.
You
Yes.
can't hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
We can all hear.
Ansu, we cannot hear you.
So there is an issue with.
I think there's some problem at your end. We can hear her.
So
Okay.
Yeah.
Ansu, hold for a second, because the
Sure.
people are trying to fix the problem. So,
Oh, sure.
by the way,
No, ma'am.
but he's trying.
Ansu,
Ansu, can you speak a few words so that we can hear you?
Yes. Yes. Am I audible now?
Very, very faint
Okay.
voice.
Should I speak a little louder? Is that helpful?
Ansu, you are fine at our end.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you.
I think it is better. It has improved, Ansu.
Okay, thank you.
Oh,
Should
excellent.
should I
the state
start?
Yeah, Ansu, for the audience who are online and in the room, Ansu is research associate at King's College, London, and she has been active through various projects on the cities, disasters and risk reductions, climate change adaptations, including feminist science studies, science, technology, and society studies. Anyway, over to you, Ansu. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar. I will share my presentation quickly, if that's okay. I hope everyone can see my presentation. Can anyone confirm?
Not yet.
Can some, okay.
It's coming. Ansu, it is coming. So.
Can you please confirm? Yes.
Very well. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And I will quickly start. First of all, my sincere apologies. Even though I'm in Delhi, I wasn't able to travel to the venue due to some back pain issues. But let me just quickly present my work. So I'm going to speak on disaster risk reduction. And disaster risk reduction is, well, out of 17 sustainable development goals, 10 speak to disaster risk reduction in one way or the other. What I'm going to share today is a very specific question around DRR in developing country context, and that is about producing science. The question is actually coming from two projects which I've worked on. So I'll briefly introduce you to the project so you get a context of where my observations are coming from, and then I'll just put in front of you the question that I'm currently thinking through. So the title of my presentation is Administering Science for Disaster Risk Reduction, and the two case studies that I'll flag for my argument today is from India and Nepal, and it's from two projects, so I've named all my co-authors. First project is a landslip project. It aims to develop landslide early warning system in India, and what we need to take from this particular presentation is the fact that within this project, there is a keen focus on Geological Survey of India as one of the scientific administrative organizations which is tasked with producing early warning system. Well, it's the nodal agency. So within the project also, GSI plays a very crucial role. It's part of the project consortium, as well as it is one of the key stakeholders which will eventually produce the early warning to disseminate it on the ground. And that brings us to a very crucial question about the GSI as a scientific administrative organization and some of the challenges that we faced during the project. So one was this transition that GSI is expected to undergo during the course of the project. GSI, if we look at it historically and if we try to contextualize it, we'll see that it was established as a survey organization for exploring mineral resources for the country. And it's institutionally located in within public sector units like HCL and NALCO, which are essentially mineral exploration units for the country. And directly GSI has not been, until it was identified as nodal agencies for DRR, sorry, for landslides, it wasn't directly dealing with the disaster risk reduction questions. So this shift from being contextually and institutionally located in a space which is there to explore minerals and then moving into DRR space has been an important transition. This shift actually calls for understanding how GSI collects data, what data is collected, how often it is collected, and just expecting a scientific administrative organization to undergo this transition without providing, without understanding the challenges in the process is something that we're going to talk about. And what I'll try to bring out from this presentation is the fundamental shift in the institutional positioning of such scientific administrative organizations, which is required for DRR in developing country context. So this was just to introduce you to one project. And similar struggle is observed in Tomorrow Cities project, another project totally different. And it works in 4 cities, but we will be focusing specifically on Department of Hydrology and Meteorology in Kathmandu, Nepal. And you can think of it as an equivalent to IMD in India, basically. And similarly, like GSI, which was not originally located in the context of disaster management or disaster risk reduction. DHM is located in the context of harnessing water for agriculture and electricity production. So it is contextually located in that space as well as institutionally. If you look at all the other organizations that it works with, have to do with production of energy or efficient use of water for agriculture. And this additional task for them to produce flood forecast, agrometeorology forecast, or weather forecast is a task which has been given, is more of an afterthought, which has been added to their work trajectory. And how it has been handed over is also an interesting thing. Again, due to the limitation of time here, we'll just focus on one of the ideas within DHM, which is flood warning system. So flood warning system was developed as a part of a project, an international consortium project of which DHM was a part. And the project was Hindu Kush project, which aimed at developing a regional flood warning system. So what the system did was it introduced telemetric rain gauges across the rivers in the region and tried to monitor the movement of rainfall, try to movement the flow of river water. And thus the flood warning system was developed. The major limitation in the process was, though they have a flood warning system, it's still not related to the weather forecast. It's still related to the flow in the river. And that's a major transition that is still missing. Again, a transition which requires us to understand how this particular institution produces science, how the process was institutionalized to produce knowledge. So this was just a quick beginning. This was just a quick overview of the two institutions that I want to quickly compare.
So you have 3 minutes now.
Yes, I'll come. I'll just leave you with a question. I just wanted to give you a brief overview of the two institutions. And so within GSI and DHM, we can see some parallels. The parallels being, first of all, both the institutions are historically and institutionally not located in disaster risk reduction. There is a need to shift the understanding of disasters from natural to social, which is not inherent in the system that they're currently working in. And this shift is required of disaster management authorities within developing countries, but that's not where the science is coming from. And the contextualization also reveals that science for DRR is highly context specific, which country it is produced in, what are the resources, and how the knowledge is being assimilated. So the biggest challenge comes when the international frameworks like Sendai and Hugo give a very top-down understanding of more science and assuming that everybody has an equal access to science or equal understanding of science or equal way of assimilating science. So that is what I wanted to broadly flag in front of you in terms of certain questions, the need to understand that science, which is expected to be produced for DRR in this new context, requires us to reflect on our scientific administrative organizations within developing countries, which operate in a very different context than their counterparts in developed countries. And acknowledging this difference is of immense importance of how we address disaster management, even in our policy frameworks. So I just want to leave you with that, and I'll stop sharing the screen. And I hope I was in time.
Thank you, Anshu Ogra. That was very timely and precise, and I'm sure there will be some questions, but for that we'll have to wait. Can we go straight to our next speaker, who is Sri Rajesh Gupta? I wonder whether Mr. Rajesh Gupta is online. Yes, I can see. Yes, you are. Welcome, Sri Rajesh Gupta. Rajesh Gupta is IRSEE officer, and he looks after skill development, labor and employment. Kindly mute yourself when you are not speaking, please. and urban development vertical in Niti Aayog. And of course, he has several published papers to his credit. Mr. Gupta is going to speak on institutions for sustainable development. Over to you, Mr. Gupta. You have 10 minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Pushpam. I'll be sharing my presentation. Let me know if it's there. Is it visible? Is the presentation visible?
Not yet, but maybe sometimes it takes few seconds. No, not yet. Yep, it's coming.
It's up there?
Not fully. Yep, unless this is the deformated slides, but
How about now?
we can see something, but it looks like, oh yeah. Okay, so maybe this is,
Yeah, it's there.
oh, meant to be that. Okay, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's indeed a pleasure speaking in this August gathering, which just got started by the luminaries like Dr. Pushpam Kumar, Professor Sak. So in this presentation, I'll be speaking on the system analysis part, and I'm thankful for IIASA TIFAC for having organized this whole event. So I'll talk about sustainability, institutions, the role of policy, where does the system analysis, which is a core theme of this event, is fitting into, and what are, say, possible pathways. So we talk a lot about sustainability. We, I think, have had a 3 decades now. The huge literature has been built up. So many talks have gone into why sustainability. So probably that's not the pertinent question out here. The pertinent question here is how sustainability. So why does it matter? I'll keep it very contemporary. When we see the graph on the right side, it indicates the typical relationship between the crude oil, the price change in the crude oil, and the change in the forex reserves of India. So what do we find out here is there's an inverse relationship, obviously, because we pay in dollars for the crude. But what is also important here is that whenever the red line, which is indicating our dipping forex reserves, you find there's a trouble with the GDP. So at one time it dropped to 4%, at another time it dropped to minus 6.2%, and probably we are again facing the headwind. Now, what does it mean? That we are into an era of imported inflation. This inflation that we are facing at present, the repo rate a couple of days ago became 5.15. Probably it will reach to 6 or even more. Who knows? But then, what's happening out here is not a demand, pull inflation. No, it's not a supply crisis. It's actually an imported inflation because we import a lot of crude. So here comes in the role of institutions and sustainability, because we are a coal nation, heavily coal nation. 60%, close to 60% is still dependent. Despite so much progress on renewables, we can't just find a good alternative for the coal. Capacity, is capacity a problem? So when I'm showing this NASA image, the Suomi satellite image 2016 of night light. So in one picture it depicts all the 3 issues: the sustainability, the institutions, and the equity that Professor Salk also talked about. So what's happening out here? The development, if it's a good, night light is a good proxy of that, is not same everywhere. Also, in the recent coal crisis, power crisis, whatever we call it, again we came to some discussion whether it's a capacity crisis. It's not a capacity crisis. We already have 410 gigawatt plus of installed capacity. It's a use crisis. It's a time of use crisis. It is a crisis how we are distributing that pool of energy in those 24 hours, and in which sectors, more importantly, in which sectors. We have built a good reserve of renewable solar and wind put together is now reaching 100 gigawatts, but at the same time coal is also getting imported. 40 million tons of coal had to be imported this year. Probably it will continue. Who knows what's going to happen? So we are trapped in this imported inflation spiral. Where does institutions come into picture? More and more services are getting offered as more and more products are getting offered as services now. We don't need a printer. We just order a print online. We don't need furniture. We can order furniture to be provided as a service for a few months. So the number of stakeholders because of this change in product as services is increasing. Also, the anthropogenic impact of climate which we are facing is increasing, because we are venturing into newer areas. New products are being tried, new services are being tried, new mobility patterns are emerging. So it's also, when we say electric vehicle, now the question comes, okay, good electric vehicle, but what to do with the batteries that complete their life? Solar, good, but what to do with the solar cells which complete their life? Similarly, the intertemporal climate deficit, the same thing, I mean, the intergenerational thing that Professor Pushpam talked about. So these things are becoming increasingly more and more complex, and therein comes the role of institutions. Now, it's not about just institutions, it's a question about how many institutions. So we in India, probably we are the only country which is having 27 electricity regulators. No country does have it at the moment. Probably no country in the world will have 29 pollution control boards and 6 pollution control centers. But what's actually happening? Is it a Nash equilibrium? A typical example from game theory, a typical game happening between distribution companies and regulators. So if regulators choose the reform way, it is likely that the DISCOMs will choose the status quo. And if DISCOMs choose the reform way, it is more likely that the regulators will change the status quo, because each of them have their own vested interest in remaining where they are. So as a result, on the bottom right quadrant, when we see the outcome is -1, which should be most preferred outcome, instead of that, we end up choosing the status quo, -10, -10, which a typical Nash. There are many economists in the house. I hope they can make sense out of it. So what institutions need today? 3 core things. One is the people, right? So people should be research agile. No institutions without people. So institution is not just a brick and mortar building or a campus or something, but it's people who make the institution. So they should be research agile. The delivery efficiency. So at a reasonable cost in a reasonable time, the outcome should be visible. Then there is the era of targeting a general equilibrium has gone. There are so many stakeholders, complexity has increased so much that now you can at best have a few multiple partial equilibriums rather than a whole general equilibrium. So I'll try to illustrate it with the help of this graph. So suppose you have what kind of people are there that institutions need. So they can have a high problem solving capacity or a low problem solving capacity on the y-axis, and x-axis you see that they can have a low research acumen or a high research acumen. Similarly, in the market, there can be a high demand or a low demand, and a high supply or a low supply for the talent in institutions. Now, if you just rotate this particular chart 180 degrees counterclockwise and superimpose it on this one, so what you get is a kind of Edgeworth box, right? So you have people who may be high in demand, who may be high in supply. At the same time, you may have people having low capacity to solve problems or low research acumen. So now let us see what's the scenario. There are people who are
Mr. Rajesh Gupta, yes. You might like to summarize it, please, because your time.
How much time do I have, Professor Kumar? Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are, but I was not. 3 minutes, please.
Yeah, I'll try to sum it up in 3 minutes. Thank you so much. So you have people with low research acumen, low problem solving capacity, but unfortunately they are high in demand and high in supply. These are the PowerPoint consultants that are flooding the market at present. You can have people who are good problem fixers but very low in research acumen. These people are also high in demand but unfortunately low in supply. And then you have very high H index researchers. The universities are flooded with them. So it reminds me of one of the conference with IIM directors where the joke was that if your research is very good, probably it is of least use for the practical, least practical use. Okay, similar to the anecdote where Queen asked after 2008 global financial crisis how we could not predict it, despite England being home to the world famous economists. So what exactly is required is the people who are high in research acumen, who have high research capacity, who can also solve problems. The capacity to solve problems is also high, but unfortunately they are in low demand and low supply as well. These are the system analysts people, and that's where this conference becomes so important. So Viktor Polterovic in 2011, a Russian economist, talked about an inefficient equilibrium called institutional trap. What is an institutional trap? So ideally, if something is bad, some system is bad, it should collapse. But now we are trapped in a situation where something is bad, but it will continue to remain bad. It will not collapse, right? Because our coal dependency is not desirable. It continues to remain so. Our distribution companies, I mean, they are in losses, but they'll continue to remain so. Special economic zones, they won't deliver. We have got 15,000 ITIs in the country with a placement rate of say 0.9%. We have so many APMCs, nothing, much is happening out there. Coal India, I mean, a super example of a monopoly is still, we had to import coal. Courts, 20 million plus cases pending. So are we facing a regulation curse? What is the remedy out there? So I'll just say that we need system analysts. The fourth quadrant, that I was talking about in the picture, we need to create a quasi market. So quasi market means that the government is not providing the services to the vulnerable sections directly, but it is creating vouchers for many suppliers who can provide a quality service. So rather than providing an inferior quality service in-house, there can be a competition among market suppliers to provide that service. So that's quasi market probably a solution. Then the last one is evidence-based
I
policy
do.
making. I'm done,
Thank
sir.
you.
I'm done. Thank you so much. Thanks for the time. Thank you.
I mean, it was just for the time, not that your talk was less interesting. It was very good, but there are two other people who have to speak. Thank you very much.
I do understand.
Thank you, Mr. Rajesh Gupta. Now we straight away go to the next presenters, that is Dr. Debanjana De. Dr. De, are you online? Dr.
Yes,
Debanjana De?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Excellent. So, welcome. And Dr.
Thank
De is, okay, good. Dr. De is a fellow at the Indian Institute of Sciences in Bangalore, and she works on various issues, including science and policy relationships, informal knowledge systems, ecosystem and biodiversity, agricultural science and technology, innovation, and so on and so forth. Right now, she is going to speak on institutions shaped by human-nature interactions for sustainability. I repeat, institutions shaped by human-nature interactions for sustainability. Devanjana, you have 8 to 10 minutes maximum. Thanks.
Can you see my screen?
It's coming. Yep, we can see. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, organizers, for giving me this opportunity to speak in this conference. Today, I'll be speaking on institutions shaped by human nature interactions for sustainability. So we all know about the IBIS Global Assessment Report of 2019, which found that around 1 million animal and plant species are being threatened to extinction, and their loss is a direct result of human activity, and it continues to threat human well-being in all regions of the world. So immediately after this release of report, there was an article in National Geographic which stated that the bonds that hold nature together may be at risk of unraveling, but these bonds that are being unraveled is unfortunately not unraveled accidentally, but it is driven by economic activities and development in general, and these are being governed by policies that we have created to suppress, control, or use the natural resources. So these policies are very much part of the institutions as the rules and norms that have been created to govern the nature and the human nature interactions. So in this paper today, I'll discuss about the institutional creativity or this rule-making capacity of certain communities which enable them to live within the nature's limit by taking a case of Bunny grasslands in Gujarat. So their institutions are based on their knowledge system and years of learning, which have been developed by being part of an ecosystem which is very different from the state's knowledge about grassland. So briefly about the Bunny grassland. Bunny is located in the northern part of Gujarat, in the Kutch district of Gujarat, and it is known to be the largest natural grassland in Indian subcontinent and one of the finest in grassland in Asia. So the Bunny landscape is not only rich in terms of diverse species of flora and fauna, but it also displays a very unique human-nature relationship. So the Bunny is a vast stretch of arid grassland which experiences recurrent drought spells, erratic rainfall, but the people or the animal or wildlife there are amazingly well adapted to this variability that this region experiences. The Bunny grassland has been home to the community called Maldari pastoralis. They mainly rear animals, and they have lived in this place for more than 4 to 5 centuries, and they have carefully bred some of the best adaptive breeds of cattle, buffalo, camel, horses, etc. So, but this region have encountered several developmental challenges, both direct as well as indirect, natural as well as anthropogenic, driven by natural and anthropogenic drivers. So there are various developmental interventions by the state which impacted the grassland and its inhabitants greatly. Suppose the damming of rivers, which checked the seasonal water flow to the Bunny grassland, which used to flood the area seasonally every year and used to remove the surface soil salt particles from the Bunny annually. But with damming of river, this natural mechanism which kept salinity of soil at check stopped. Similarly, there was a large-scale plantation of exotic species called Prosopis juliflora by the Forest Department to check disintegration of soil salinity. But with the introduction of this exotic species, large number of indigenous flora and fauna which thrived in this grassland, the numbers declined and many of them ceased to exist. So, but to these various developmental challenges, the communities residing there for years have developed several measures or institutions to deal with this crisis. For example, with the invasion of Prosopis juliflora, they started making charcoal a secondary source of livelihood. With industries that have come up in Bunny, they have filed case with the NGT to stop the non-forest activity. With drought, which is a common phenomena in Bunny region, they have developed several breeding protocol to develop adaptive breeds which are adapted to the region. They have the migration protocol within intra and inter-region migration. So along with it, there has been a restoration project which were initiated by the state. For example, the working plan by the Forest Department of Gujarat for regeneration of Bunny grassland. The working plan was sanctioned and it included the conversion of grazing land into conservation areas. So it mainly led to fragment the grassland into 3 zones, with clearing of one zone called the grassland zone, with clearing the precipice in the grassland zone, and then treating the area for improving grass cover. But in the process, the plan also restricted grazing, not only during the treatment period, but also after that. So it specifically mentioned that the grasses would be cut and stored in grass banks, from where the Maldharis would collect the grass and feed their stock. But this were mainly resisted by the Maldhari. They say that this livestock would cease to exist, or they are attuned to this region and they are meant to graze, not to stall feed. So these plans that has been developed by the state has never taken into consideration or tried to understand or appreciate the knowledge system of the ecosystem people, or the rules and norms that these communities have created to govern the resources. So these institutions have been mainly developed or devised by these communities through their enormous experience or human nature relationship that they have built over years of living and learning in the particular area. So they have institutionalized certain rules and norms in their daily practices, such as grazing rules, when and where to graze their livestock so as to minimize the grazing pressure. They have devised a breeding protocol, which is unlike the state or the nation's crossbreeding policy, which was initiated since 1970s for cattle. The main criteria for breeding was the ability of the stock to survive on minimum fodder during stress
You have
season.
2 minutes, please.
Yeah, I am just winding up. Yeah, the ability to walk long distances during drought seasons, their ability to survive in disease-free life, or to graze on the field on their own. So their valuation clearly is dependent on the adaptation, well-being, diversity of feed, low disease infestation, health of the calf, etc., which is very different from the instrumental values of increasing milk yield. So these institutions, this has mainly been has come into place due to the co-evolution of knowledge and practices within the community, and which is shaped by a three-way relationship between the biophysical system, the communities, not only presence of community, but their decision-making ability and the biodiversity, which and then their decision is being influenced by this relationship, a biophysical system, what the demand is, and the biodiversity, the need of the livestock, the grass species, the animals there. So the communities which have coexisted within the ecosystem for several generations, they have developed several conservation and management practices through long-term ecological understanding and learning from crisis. So when we talk of sustainability and policies, so there is a need for a convergence of different forms of knowledge and practices so as to enable a system which takes into account the biophysical reality and the ontology of biodiversity, along with the communities as decision makers, as a part of decision making body. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Day. Can we go to our next presenter, that is Professor Amitabh Mukherjee, who is at VIT University, Vellore in Tamil Nadu. He is Senior Professor and Director of the center called Nano Biotechnology. And he's going to speak here on nanotechnology, an enabler for sustainable development. Extremely interesting and exciting topic. So over to you, Professor Mukherjee. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar. Is my screen visible to all of you? Is my screen visible? Can you please confirm whether my screen is visible?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Like to make it on full screen.
Yeah, I have done it now.
Okay.
Okay. So we'll be talking about maybe a little divergence from the previous topics where we read about sustainable economic development and people migration, then to the biodiversity. So it is a little different from that. We are talking about nanotechnology as a technology, whether it can enable sustainable development. Yeah. So this is known to all of you because you are experts in the field and you know about the 17 SDGs which are declared by UN. And I'll just try to explain how the nanotechnology fits in this 17 SDGs. If you look at it, science and technology as a whole can be fitting into the contribution to health, that is number 3. Then number 6, we talk about the access to clean water. Then energy and environment, that is number 7, number 13, 14, and 15. Then innovation and infrastructure, that also comes to 9 and 11, and responsible consumption and production, that is number 12. So their technology can play a major role. And as you know, these SDGs are interwoven together. They are quite interlinked. So when you are able to work on this number of SDGs using science and technology as such, so other SDGs also will improve. That's the basic idea about the SDGs. So a quick look into the IR and WF nexus. IR is called Fourth Industrial Revolution, which is portrayed in 21st century, and it is called the Revolution in Information Communication Technologies, along with cyber physical systems and IoT. So IR, how it's related to nanotechnology, because IR encompasses different smart technologies being developed in last maybe 20 to 30 years. Among them, biology is completely revolutionized by gene sequencing. Nanotechnology is one of these in IR smart technology, then renewable energy, quantum computing, and of course, there are interactions across physical, digital, and biological domains. This we hope will change how we are looking at the problems now. So this 4 IR promises exceptional opportunities to solve different water, energy, food nexus, as is well known. So resource challenges like biodiversity conservation, healthy oceans, so water security, clean air, and so on. So IR, one of the pillars are in nanotechnology. Now, if we move on to very brief on nanotechnology for the people who are who well known, we are well versed about the term, but just a little bit scientific acknowledgement of this technology. This is one of the most promising technology of 21st century, and all nanotechnology start with a quote by Richard Feynman, which was done in 1959 in famous lecture. I think no nanotechnology lecture can start without this. There's a plenty of room at the bottom where we try to utilize the atomic scale. So nanotechnology defined by NNI is understanding and control of matter at nanoscale, where we can go to dimensions between approximately 1 to 100 nanometer, and which enable unique phenomena and novel applications. So here we are dealing with novel applications. I'll just touch upon a few and leave your imagination to work up with related. So these are basic, as a nice diagram, which gives the center as nano, and you can see the development of nanomaterial, nanosensors, quantum computing, different nano-coated surfaces, nanomedicine, and so on. Then you have IoT, energy, artificial intelligence, soil and water health, digital buildings that are associated, and in the largest sphere you can see biodiversity, smart infrastructure. So they are all interrelated, and you can have there. I remember there was a saying, or there was an ad long back when I was a kid, that there is a bit of sale in everybody's life given by Steel Authority of India. So we can say from these applications that there is bit of nano in all of our lives. Now, I'll touch upon a few cases where SDGs can be improved by nanotechnology. One of the major focus is, of course, remote healthcare, which is more felt now. The effect of remote healthcare is more felt in post-COVID era or during COVID era. As you know, we are not able to go out, and we used to go for this remote healthcare. We are forced to rather. So shortage of trained medical personnel is large in an aging society, especially in village, as all of you know. Current pandemic, as I told you, remote healthcare become an accepted norm over worldwide because we are forced to do it. So it is basically built upon the data collection, like wearable biosensors, again made up of nanomaterials, and you can get the data collection by doctors or medical personnel. The data can be sent to the data centers and analyzed using high performance computing. Again, high performance computing, you can use nano chips. Then artificial intelligence you can use to get health of the health and medical diagnosis based on the large data set. You can go for big data analysis here. So here, how the nanotechnology can play a role, you can have nano sensors like wearable biosensors. Communication system is very important when you look at data gathering like 5G communications, then you can go for remote health monitoring. This is going to be more obvious when you have more population and more population deprived of direct health care by the doctors. You know the doctors is to patient people ratio what we have in India. So this is more prominent for a country like us or other third world countries. The second one is also related to health, but this is on more advanced side where you look at the nanotechnology in different, I call it triangle, like medical care, like diagnosis. You have the nanotechnology based PCR, DNA analysis, POCT, point of care devices, wearable monitors, microfluidics. Then there are drug discovery, like you may all know that Moderna, the Moderna vaccine for COVID-19 and the Pfizer vaccine, they used actually lipid nanoparticles. So nanoparticles are not about the technology which is a conceptual or proof of concept. It is at your home now and it is revolutionizing the drug discovery in other markets. People are trying to use these vaccines for other diseases also now using lipid nanoparticles. Then there can be virus inactivation by UV-led nanoparticle like photocatalytic nanoparticle. There can be air purification. Somebody was talking about Delhi's air problem, air pollution problem. You can have air purifiers developed by nanoscale materials, and these are quite well-known nanopore separation membrane, which you are using at home, the air purifiers. Environmental measurement also you can use nanotechnology. Then if you sum up the organ on a chip, cellular imaging, all these are related to either disease diagnosis or disease detection or treatment of the diseases where you can use the nanotechnology. Again, these are only glimpses. If you are interested, you can go in detail. The second pillar, what I want to touch upon is energy and environment. This is very prominent in many of the SDGs, as I told you. So basically what you want to do, somebody is talking about the things are not improving and it is going on in the same way, but it's not declining also. So if you look at reduction in carbon emissions or renewable energy generation like fuel cell, green energy, solar cell or EV, electrical vehicle, actually, in the bottom of it, you are using some nano-based chips or some nanomaterials. Like fuel cell, we use carbon nanomaterials. Solar cell also, we are using perovskite cells, which are nano size. Nano size basically decreases the mass and you can increase the uses. Energy saving also, you can use semiconductor technologies where you use nano size silicon oxide beams or semiconductors. Similarly, energy transport and storage, solar fuel, electrolysis, artificial photosynthesis, all these you can have either nanomaterials or nano-size materials or nano-size oxides. So energy and environment, basically more for energy needs, you can or you do use nanomaterials. Now, when are using lot of nanomaterials, we need to think about a circulation. We call it circulation economy is very well known now, where we go for a flatter economy to a circular economy. So similarly, we need to think about the material circulation also. When it comes from the mines, what are the issues we are having, whether we can minimize the usage of the materials by nanotechnology. That will also minimize the mining and mining related problems. Then this is the next part. When you get the material from mine, you can go for smelting and purification of the material. As a materials engineer, we are more interested in that. And if you can solve the problem of energy consumption in the smelting and other case, you can again lower the environmental load. Then ultimately the physical sorting of material, then recycling of material. Here actually we are talking about you are using nanomaterial, but you need to look at the circulation of the material so that again you have to deviate from a flat bottom surface to a circular economy or circular management. This is also called life cycle assessment analysis now. The LCA analysis, if you do for the materials you are going to use, what we discussed before, then you can save yourself of the generating a huge amount of waste somebody are talking about. You should not use materials to generate a lot of waste.
Time is almost up, please.
Yeah, I have one more slide, closing remarks. So through nanotechnology, already we've known that a revolutionizes many spheres of society. I've just shown some glimpses to you. And we should not ignore the potential risk associated with it. This is very important. So all the materials, as you know, comes with a price. So nanomaterials also, there have been a lot of analysis done on safety and risk of nanomaterial. We should understand this risk and safety of nanomaterial. The gaps remain in understanding, so we need to build up research on that. So the ability to understand, assess, and combat the risk can ensure the nanomaterial can be made safe and sustainable, and we can go for sustainable development of nanomaterial, and nanomaterial can be a driver for sustainable planet and future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Keep your questions again for the time being, and we have the probably the last presentation by Professor Pramod Singh from IRMA, and he's going to he has a he has been working in the area of sustainable livelihoods and the environment and development, including climate change, where he was one of the lead authors in IPCC. He's going to speak on governance and institutions for enabling sustainable development. Governance and institutions for enabling sustainable development. Over to you, Dr. Singh.
Could you hear me?
We can hear you very, very well.
All right. And my presentation is also shared?
Correct.
Okay, great. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'll be talking about enabling sustainable development, the theme which we decided, and what is going to be the role of governance. If we look at the sustainable development goals, if we try to map along 3 dimensions, social, economic, and environmental dimensions, this is how it looks like. Now, you see a red line, and this line essentially says that half of the goals have been trade-off with another half of the goals. So how to build synergy? That's one of the bigger questions.
May we request you to keep it in full screen, please, the slide.
I know it's already in full screen. Is it now better?
Yeah, it is better now. Thank you.
All right. So, yeah. So if we look at part of the goal, which are social and economic in nature, are having trade-off with the environmental goals. So what are the options we have now? Even the existing literature also says that, well, we are not going to meet all the goals, and some of the goals are selected across nations. And often the South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa are going to be the laggers. Then we try to model it using fuzzy cognitive maps, which essentially helps in modeling complex systems. And then what we found, this is what the system diagram is all about. And what we found, if we address 2 goals, that is SDG 12 and 16, which essentially, and see that responsible production and consumption happens, and peace, justice, and strong institutions. If these 2 are taken care, we can achieve 12 goals, including these 2. So, which essentially mean how to make those institutions strong. For that, we need to have right governance in place. But before we go into governance, let's look at what are the other enablers. Governance is one, and when C governance essentially describes how collective interests are defined, negotiated, or pursued, and how the economy and society are steered and governed. The interplay between state interventions, that's government or public authority, and societal autonomy, which is essentially a self-regulation, is at the heart of governance scholarship. Governance actors from civil society and private sector work alongside governments in making such societal choices. So we will look at how that is going to be span out and how the actors are going to get engaged in the arena of engagement. Here, the ethics, values, and worldviews of these actors are going to be extremely, extremely important. That these are also important for partnerships and commitment for finance and technology, as we understand. Whatever commitments are made by developed nations, those are not being fulfilled. Social justice, societal transformation, and indigenous and local knowledge are going to be important because these are going to be situated in the worldviews of local populations. And certainly there are a need for innovations, digital transformation and feasibility of these actions. Now let us look at governance. What are those governance dimensions we have? There are three dimensions we look at in case of governance. One is the politics, which describes the process dimensions of governance to reflect the dynamic interactions between governance actors with divergence, values, interests, power, and agency. The second dimensions are the institutions. We also call it polity, which describes the structural dimensions of governance, that is the kind of norms or values or rules we have that enable or constrain human interactions, construct political communities, and structure societal interactions, including cultural, economic, and political interactions. And the third part is the practice. We also call policy praxis nexus. So this is what describes how actions is framed and taken, and how political solutions are formulated and implemented through a variety of governance interactions or instruments for the interventions. Our notion of practice goes beyond government-centric policy formulation and implementation, which reflects only one aspect of making societal choices, because developing interventions are not about what societal choices are being made by governments. So here we will introduce all these governance actors. So if you look at governance actors, it's the government is there, industry, market, media, civil society, and community at large is there. Then these actors are working at various levels, right from individuals level to household level to community to subnational, national, or international level, or could be even regional and then international level. Then we already talked about dimensions of governance. Now, these dynamic interactions between governance actors, level of and dimensions of governance constitute what we call is arena of engagement. And these arena of engagements, in case of sustainable development, are essentially the economic, political, socio-cultural, knowledge and technology, and ethical. So as we say, it's the very complex platform of interactions we have where the governance actors engage with. But within that, one has to keep in mind that equity, justice, knowledge diversity, which means plurality of knowledge by the local communities and the people, and ecosystem stewardship are extremely important.
Dr. Singh, your time is almost up.
I have 8 minutes or 10 minutes, isn't it? So
Yes.
I'll take 2 more minutes.
2 minutes more, please.
Yeah. So this is second last slide. One can think of talking for hours on this, but what I would like to bring out with this is when we look at these interactions, it's not happens in one way. It's a very dynamic phenomena. So if you look at the lower panels where we'll have level of engagement, arena of engagement, actors, dimensions of engagement, and the value, ethics, and worldview. Based on these interactions, we are going to have pathways for sustainable development. And these pathways are going to decide whether we are going to have more choices in the future or fewer choices in the future. The kind of actions which the nations have taken are essentially heading towards fewer choices in the future. We will not discuss about future arena of development because those are the possible options we have. But straightforward come to the closing remarks. If we are looking at governance to or sustainable development to be reality, which is a long-term goal, SDGs are a short-term 2030 agenda, but sustainable development is a long-term goal for human beings. The role of ethics, values, worldviews, and societal justice will be critical for societal transformation and protection of citizens against climate change as human rights, because this is going to be the most wicked problem in this century. All developing society will have their own context-specific pathways to sustainable development, bearing in mind that a shared planet needs to regenerate a healthier and offer meaningful livelihoods to all through the just and equitable sharing of resources. And for better sustainable development, there is a need for human race to follow a value-driven system of production and consumption. That value biodiversity reintegrates human and nature and allows humankind to flourish as genuinely Homo sapiens, which has to be wide, sensible, judicious beings in this Anthropocene.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was very, thanks very much. Time for questions from the room or from the virtual world. So now the floor is open and please go ahead. Ask question if you have any. Also, this session is also open for the fellow panelists. So in case any questions, comments? Yes, madam. Kindly introduce yourself. That will be helpful.
Professor John, Institute of Social Sciences. This is not working. Is it working? Okay. I was really sort of happy that I attended this session, and I think many of you actually spoke about the issue of values, the idea of social justice, and that was a welcome change, I think, from yesterday's session and today's session. Sometimes we focus so much on the systems that we forget about the fact that the system is not a level playing field. There are serious sort of inequalities, there is injustice, there's a whole section of the population that is poor, precisely the system has actually operated. So one can really look at structural causes of reality as it exists today. And we tend to sort of overlook the systemic problems, gaps, or issues. So I just wanted maybe whoever wishes to take the question, how does one look at addressing the whole range of, let's say, issues of poverty, discrimination that actually exists in society, and how do each of our sort of systems, whether we are talking about nanotechnology or any other sort of governance systems, sustainable development goals, how do we hope to address through a systemic sort of analysis some of these existing issues, which actually tells us that we are where we are because we have ignored these very, fundamental issues of social justice. I mean, the rules of the game are sort of actually written by people who have something to benefit from. And if these very people are now going to talk that in the name of sustainable development, we need to sort of fix things, and what does it actually mean for the poor? Because where I'm located, I increasingly feel that the poor are going to be I'm just being provocative here, that's a group that's going to be a dispensable commodity in the way in which we are moving forward. So, I'm just provoking a little bit of discussion on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we ask our panelists to answer, any other questions? No. I think you have raised a very pertinent question, set of questions, not only one questions. And but I won't be using my position as a chair, and I would give chance to my fellow panelists. You want to say something on this briefly, please? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to. Am I audible now?
Fine. So maybe first the response from online. Go ahead, please.
So, though the first slide which we showed where we did a modeling of the SDGs, where we found, and I showed only one result because there are multiple of those. So when it comes to poverty, so we looked at the two factors. if we address peace, justice, strong institutions, and sustainable consumption and production, set of goals gets addressed, but not poverty and equity related issues. But if we address poverty, that's ending poverty, equitable quality education, affordable, sustainable modern energy, and along with that partnership for finance, technology, and capacity building, then range of other SDGs are also going to be attained, which are along with this, food and nutrition security will be taken care, then availability and sustainable management of water will be taken care, affordable and sustainable modern energy will be taken, decent work and inclusive growth will be taken care. So there are various those enabling factors which are going to play a role. So it's important that if we are going to address poverty, has to be addressed. The equitable quality education has to be taken care of. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for this important question. I mean, the one way of what exactly you have asked, can we design systems which actually take care of the poor, for instance? One example that comes from for example, if you see the transportation sector. So see, as an individual, always between rich and poor, there are some individual choices and there are some societal choices. If a city goes for a good public transport system, okay, I mean, one example is, you might know about Bogota's mayor, who basically designed good footpaths and, public mass transit system. Basically, he made a statement that a developed society is not the one where poor use cars, but the developed society is the one where the rich use public transport. The idea is, if we design our system to have a cycle track, to have a footpath, and to have a good public transportation system, then obviously car becomes a liability for us, not an asset. I mean, people can own cars for the status, but then they would not use cars, what a transportation researcher would say. I mean, that's what they basically has the goal. So when we design our systems, I mean, if I go to a mall where there is no staircase, then obviously I lose my individual choice but not to use the kind of mechanized system which actually consumes a lot of energy. So I think the idea of carbon budget which we have, and when actually you said the poor can be dispensed with, I mean, I just beg to differ there, where actually poor are needed, because when India argues in an international negotiation that we have less per capita carbon emission, that they are arguing because the rich is hiding behind the poor. And that's where probably they need a large section of the society who are very, less carbon consuming. So that is actually helping India in a way. But then the carbon space that India or other developing countries are asking for, we have to ask ourselves whether that carbon space is being used for the poor, or it is going to be used by the rich to have a second car, a second home, or whatever luxurious or conspicuous consumption. So we need to design, like for example, I was talking about sufficiency star. I mean, where I was talking about less size system should cost you much cheaper rather than large size system. We are now relatively providing less cost to a more efficient system, but efficiency has not led to a society which is less consuming. So I think we have to build in those economic instruments and design our system in such ways to basically accommodate the aspirations of all. Thank you.
Thanks very much. One more thing I would like to add here is that kindly mute yourself if you are not speaking. Most of these bodies and conventions, including the SDG, they have, I mean, in fact, goal number 1 is on poverty, goal number 2 is on hunger. So those goals are not bereft of any concern for the poverty or economic inequality. Now the challenge is more at the operational level, that how the national government, like for India, how they design the policy which becomes pro-poor, the workforce, growth, the unemployment, poverty. In fact, I come to India being an Indian, and when I see, you don't need demography or data. You see that the number of poor are increasing, and the space is shrinking because the number of people is increasing. So it's a serious problem, and the designing of policy and the development has to relook at them. So, but me too, like you, I'm happy that in the system conference, people have in this session at least brought some of the institutional issues, some of the you said about development, but the cultural issues and also application of technology and some cases. I think that give some kind of hint that what are the intervention we need to achieve sustainability, and not a engineering driven modeling alone. Those modelings have their own value, but then that modeling should be nuanced to understand the context, a specific issue. I think thanks to our...
Yeah, should I, Professor Kumar,
Please go ahead briefly, please.
a very quick response to the question that Madam has asked. So there are fortunately two very good tools available, though not very enthusiastic. Professor Kumar was not very enthusiastic about data, but yes, the more data about those people. So your question was about what to do in the new paradigm when people got left out, right? Those who couldn't be, onboarded. So one is data. We need to know who are those. So I'll give you a corollary of the migrant crisis recently. So unless we are knowing that who are these people to whom the benefit should reach to, being in Niti Aayog, we have seen this happening, that yes, that if we have the right kind of data, then the problem of exclusion can be addressed to a great extent. Second, unfortunately, the second part of the solution is, it is getting built up, it is evolving in the country, and that one is about the social audit. Whatever new paradigm, whether it is SDG, whether it is other social sector schemes, whether it is social security, whatever new paradigm we are attempting to address the problems or achieving the goal towards sustainability, there has to be an inbuilt mechanism of social audit. So that particular thing, so it is coming up gradually, but it will take a lot of effort from civil society as well, so to get it institutionalized, and that's where the role of system analysts into the institutions comes into picture. Thank you.
Thank you all once again. Thanks.
So thank you for this session, and the session has came to the end. So I would like to felicitate speaker sir, and thank you to everyone who participated in the event. So please, yeah. So I would like to request chair sir to present the memento too. Okay. Now I would like to call Chakradhar sir to present award to token of appreciation to Pushpam Kumar sir. So we are having a break for 5 minutes, and after that we will start the new session. Okay, thank you, sir.
This is connection.
Andhra
Okay.
Pradesh campus. No, no, connection was Lal.
It's a very giveaway name. Yeah. I think you.
Raji
Yeah.
Vasudharan Mishra is now
Oh.
now our tender is done.
I think our Hyderabad campus is now doing work with NIUA. No, there is a new program that is being
Yes.
offered.
In fact, I was telling Hitesh that he was also telling me the head of the NIUA to help him in that program also. How it is being done.
बंद कर दो if you
नहीं आप सेटिंग कर रहे हो
हाँ कर रहे
हाँ, कर लीजिए बिल्कुल कोई इशू नहीं मैंने सोचा ऑटोमेटिक स्टार्ट हो गई
बट बहुत ही स्लो में हो रहा है
कुछ नहीं
4 ही हुआ है ना 4% आपको आई थिंक वी शुड क्लोज I'll close कर
इंट्रोड्यूस करवा रहे हैं
मैं क्लोज कर रही हूँ
इंट्रोडक्शन
नो नो मैं कुछ नहीं कर रही I was just scanning a pen drive because nobody was there, so I said, let me.
अच्छा 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 you took the floor
Yeah. Thank you.
चलो
सर कौन सा वाला है
Chair.
Okay. So we can start now.
Hello. Hope I am audible. Good morning, everyone. The second session in this hall today is the topic a systems analysis approach for complex global problems. Now, today's world is plagued with many kind of complex problems, from pandemics, which we are still facing, and the geopolitical crisis, economic crisis. So there are many problems now we are facing with, and the speakers now, I think, are going to dwell upon various approaches, system analysis approaches, on how to tackle these complex global problems. And to moderate this session today, we have a keynote speaker, that is Dr. Rajiv Ranjan Mishra. He is the Chief Advisor and Chairman of Strategy and Policy Unit at the National Institute of Urban Affairs in India, and additionally acts as an advisor for the Center for Ganga River Basin Management and Studies at IIT Kanpur. He steered several policies in housing sector, urban SDGs, new urban agenda, and sustainable technologies, and played a pivotal role in an enactment of the landmark Real Estate Regulation Development Act, that is 2016 RERA. He led the organization to international and national recognition, including Public Agency of the Year Award distinction by Global Water Intelligence. Sir, now I request you to start the proceedings of the sessions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think I'm audible. Thank you so much, and it gives me great pleasure to be here with all of you. Several of, I think, a larger number of people are joining us virtually, and some of the people who have actually come here in the classroom in this thing, a special welcome to them. I also welcome all the speakers of this session. As we know, the whole conference is upon systems thinking in different aspects of our development. And today in this particular session, we are going to deliberate upon systems thinking and sustainable urbanization. Very, very relevant topic, because there are several sessions on systems management or systems thinking. There are several aspects of urbanization. We keep on dealing with them separately in different parts. So this is a chance for us to look at sustainability, urbanization from the systems thinking point of view. I'm quite sure there will be different aspects, and then to take us through this whole session, I have been given this chance to chair this session and also share some of my thoughts. In addition to me, we have 7 speakers. 2 of them are present along with me on the dais, and 5 people are going to join virtually. So, and as all the fellow speakers will note, we are starting the session about half an hour late. So I think little bit of housekeeping rules, like let's all be little precise so that we can end at least on time at 1:15. So I think to do that, 10-12 minutes kind of thing should be our idea to speak out and do that successfully. To initiate this discussion, because I think we are going to have more specific discussion through the speakers about managing urban rivers or urban transition systems approach. Urban heat island will also be looked at. Similarly, there are also rural urban resource utilization or resilience, that also is one of the area. Bangalore's water governance will be also presented, and also wastewater in hydrological modeling. So I think we have very fascinating set of very special topics which we are going to hear from the speakers. But to just share some of my thoughts and overview, I think we keep on talking about this word. I think urbanization, sustainability, systems management, they are all talked very commonly. I mean, we very easily we use these terms. The question is how much we really practice, how much we actually have to learn to really practice it. I mean, is it not so easy to practice them and we only just talk about them. So I think perhaps a session like this will help us. As we know, the urbanization, the potential of urbanization globally, we are all aware that by 2050, 65% of the population, global population, almost 6 billion people will be living in the urban area. And how much land mass we have got in urban area? Almost negligible compared to the population which lives there. Urban areas contribute 70% of GDP. I'm talking globally. Carbon dioxide, CO2 emission, if you look at again, urban areas contribute a huge area, almost 60-70% comes from there. Similarly, energy consumption is also very high in this area. So when we look at sustainability of this urbanization, and urbanization, I mean, we always say in Asia and India, we are going to urbanize much faster from now onwards. So I think we will be really adding lot more problem for us in our urban setup. So looking at that, how exactly we can manage it, how exactly we can bring a kind of more holistic thinking or systems thinking, let's look at a few things. And then especially when I am talking you, I am trying to highlight upon the interplay of three things: people, city, and nature. And we have to look at how these three things interplay, and then different programs of government or NGOs or other programs or other activities or even our thinking, how they need to be synchronized. Otherwise, we keep on urbanizing, so we keep on constructing more, we keep on building more, we keep on adding infrastructure. And then that happens because there is a lot of pressure on us with the population. The population is our, as we say in the urban setup, some population growth of its own, but there is also population growth due to migration. So I think all these things put together, there is a much more pressure to provide them services, the basic amenities. To do that, we will also have a target to construct houses fast. Go for a technology and then make it in 30 days you can construct a house. I mean, that kind of pressure also will be there on us. At the same time, now who takes this pressure? Ultimately, the natural resources bear the brunt. I think the lot of pressure goes on them. So how we can look at people, city, and nature together, that's the challenge. And that challenge to some extent can be thought if we start looking at the systems thinking. I will just quote from Peter Senge about systems thinking, because not only it gives us conceptual clarity, this line also gives us some sort of solutions. A conceptual framework, a body of knowledge. He talks about systems thinking in the 5th discipline book. A conceptual framework, a body of knowledge, and tools to make the full pattern clearer and to help us see how to change them effectively. So one thing is that we have to see the whole picture, but it also says that we have to develop a body of knowledge. We have to also develop some tools which will help us in developing this kind of thinking. Because if we keep on saying, let's think holistically and all that, or integrated manner, comprehensive manner, these are the terms we hear every day. So how exactly to do that, I think we get that. Now, sustainable urbanization and system thinking also is considered a very important tool for solving complex problems. Very typically, they are called big problems. There is no easy solution. There are many stakeholders. There are many disciplines which have to come together. So they are all big problems. And in my opinion, climate change, sustainable urbanization, some of these things are the most typical example of the big problem. Managing a river basin, managing a city, its relationship with different people. So I think that's where we will not be able to look at things in a very linear or simplistic way. You cannot extrapolate how a city will behave 10 years from now. We do that. We take that what will the population growth and we fit some sort of linear curve and then we extrapolate. But are they really going to work? The big problems have a nature that problems will also evolve as you solve it. So I think we have to be on our feet continuously and keep on doing that. And very typically in our scientific work, we always believed in the reductionist thing. You go into details of something, go into the heart of it, go into depth of it and try to solve that problem. While that is very important, but it also takes away the capacity to look at what problem I am solving in depth, what my colleague Rahul is doing. Are we talking to each other? Are they not creating problem for each other? Because sometimes Very typically, I have some experience, few years of experience in public administration. Sometimes our programs come first, the solutions come first before we understand the problem. We construct houses. We say that, there is a lot of problem of housing, so you construct houses. But simply construction, I mean, we may construct house, but is it in true sense housing? Are we looking at the other amenities and other things? Sometimes we look at a river in a city and there is an encroachment on the floodplain. We have to also protect floodplain, but because the housing is not there, so people also go, some informal settlement will also come. So these are very typical way how we have to perhaps look at. And then another thing perhaps we have to look at is that there are some sort of local city problems, like different aspects of a city management. But the system thinking, we also have to look at city to city, how we will collaborate between different city, a cluster of city, even globally. What are the different cities facing? I mean, you hear Cape Town going to, I mean, the water crisis in Cape Town. You also have some of the cities facing severe housing crisis. Some of the cities may face a huge poverty issue. So I think all these things, different things. So I think globally you have to have a kind of thinking. But coming very quickly, this management of urbanization is also, we are basically talking of again an ecosystem. We should talk about the ecosystem when you have to look at the systems management. Ecosystem generally we always talk in terms of environmental thing, but cities or urban areas are basically hybrid ecosystem. You have some of the things are natural in the city, some of the things are also man-made. We also construct, we also bring new things. So I think this is a kind of hybrid ecosystem and you have to look at. So now let's look at very quickly upon this interplay of people, river, people, city and nature. Now primarily let's look at water. So I think a city may have river, it may have another source of water. Without a large source of water, it is not sustainable to have a city. So I think whether it will be on the river or maybe on some other source of water. Apart from some very artificially created cities where we transport water, unfortunately that's also happening. But generally that is the thing where you have to basically look at this thing. Now when you look at city, how you connect city with the river or its water. And looking back, suppose you have to look at your urban development, your housing, your construction, your infrastructure projects, and also look at what it's going to do to the water bodies in the city, urban wetlands, urban water bodies, and the river. Then looking back at the Peter saying, I think you have to develop certain tools to develop this kind of thinking, which helps us. So I think some of the things which perhaps Rahul is going to talk a little more about, we initiated talking about managing urban rivers, trying to develop an approach where river and city go together. And when we started developing some tools, which perhaps he will tell a little more in detail, it's bringing the city managers closer to the river or to the water. So this is an example. Otherwise, a municipal commissioner may solve its problem of cleaning or sanitation. It may remove lot of garbage and then throw it on the floodplain or dump it somewhere near the water bodies. It's not only which the individuals will do. Some of us also do. We always take pride in cleaning our house and throwing it somewhere. We don't bother about where it goes. Same thing is often done by the urban managers also. So I think that is something which we have to bring together. So you have to also develop some mechanisms, some institutions to develop these kind of systems approach. And that's why we started talking about River City Alliance. Try to develop an alliance. You are going to talk about, we all talk about climate change at a very higher level in the COPs and all that. But what it makes to the city managers? What can he or she do to really contribute towards mitigating or adapting to the climate change? So I think that's again becomes this thing. Now we talk about water positive cities. ODF plus. So I think all these things which I am talking about the nature has a very inherent component of the people also, because these programs will not be successful unless you look at the behavior pattern, unless you look at the sanitation, hygiene. I think some of the presentations will talk more about those issues. I think some discussion is also about rural-urban transition. So migration becomes very important. Now housing problem cannot be solved if you look at fixed in a time frame or look at only one types of solution, because people need different kind of housing. Some of may need only rental housing, some of them may need some support in the slum area, but urban poor will be there outside slum area also. And you don't have to only think about the urban poor, you have to think about housing as a sector. I mean, where people will come and then whether it is a sustainable thing, whether it's going to pollute the nearby water bodies or not. So I think that becomes very important thing. Energy efficiency. We always talk about energy efficient buildings and construction thing. But when we are doing a kind of water treatment plant or sewage treatment plant or any other kind of project, are we being energy efficient there also? So I think that kind of thinking has to be there. Looking to nature, I talked little more about the river and water, but you have to also think about biodiversity. Often in the city system, we don't talk much about biodiversity, or that understanding needs to further improve. Urban biodiversity, and lots of cities are now doing it. Singapore, there is a city biodiversity index, which is being followed by several, more than 30-35 cities are following. In India also, Surat and some of our climate change program, we are also looking at learning from it. What kind of trees are there in the city? So the canopy in the city is very important, and to what extent we can go for the native plantation or native biodiversity of the city and why it was there. We have to learn actually quite a lot from the nature, from the earlier days, and then bring some of them to that. Again, natural landscape can be very good public place for the people, for the new people who are coming in the city. They can be a good source of tourism. They could be good source of revenue also for the city. So, but can we link all those things to each other? And our aim should be the people should also ultimately become systems citizenship. So I think how to generate that kind of understanding and interest among them, that what they do is also going to come back to them, because if you clean your house and make your neighborhood dirty, I think you are not going to be untouched. So I think this interplay, looking at these three things, seems to be very, very important for us. Then I think another aspect, and we very typically called about blue-green infra. Now, I think there is a presentation on the heat island effect also. We all know that cities are kind of centers of heat. When we look at the climate change, perhaps cities will play a major role, and that role will depend quite a lot upon water and vegetation for the cooling purpose. So I think how we look at the water sensitive urban design, how we look at the master plan, I think these are some of the things which will help us in taking forward. And then before I request the speakers to get into more details about different things, we also have to understand that we always, in all our government programs or different missions, we talk about our vision, our targets. Now, this vision also, I think we can have a very good vision: green city, water positive city, climate resilient cities. These are all our statements that we want to take our cities to that level, our urbanization to go to that level. But again, what happens, visions without systems thinking do not actually help us in reaching there. Because then what happens, we again review these programs and come up with a certain changes and tweak it. Because a picture of future, a very rosy, very good picture of the future is necessary, but how to reach there, how to bring all these different elements together and then move ahead becomes very important. So shifting problem from one part of the system to another part of the system is not going to make the urbanization sustainable. So I think that is where it becomes very, very important. As very typically, it is also told that we in management, we also say that you have to cut a big problem into a small task and then work on it. While that may be true, but we have to also understand, if you cut a big elephant into two, you don't have two elephants, two small elephants, you have a mess. So I think that is also a possibility we have to understand and then bring a kind of thing. See, the system thinking is not part A plus part B plus part C. It is all put together in a very different way. It's also chemistry. It's not just arithmetic. It's not just a kind of numerical division. So I think that kind of thinking, that kind of approach is necessary for us to do. And perhaps in this session, we will hear little more about each of these aspects. But my appeal, I will urge that we have to look at this kind of shift. And a shift is required from seeing parts to seeing whole, from seeing people as helpless reactors to seeing them as active participant in shaping their reality, in shaping their destiny, from reacting to the present to creating the future. So I think this is perhaps the vision we should keep. This is perhaps what we are looking from deliberations of this type, because to really practice systems thinking, you have to be learning, and we have to develop our learning, and we have to be continuously learning. So I think a conference of this type will also help us moving towards that. So once again, thanking the organizers for looking into different aspects of development from the systems point of view, and systems point of view is more clearly understood in the computer and other things, the systems engineering. But I think we have to look at all the public policies and public problems to look at. So with this initial remark, I will now proceed.
Hello, may I? I'm Junichi Fujino. I'm sorry for disturbing you.
I was about to invite you, Professor.
Yeah, I only joined next to 8 minutes. So sorry. So then may I have my presentation, 5 minutes presentation now? So sorry for saying that.
Yes, yes. Actually, I was about to invite you, Dr. Fujino. So because I got the request that you want to come in the beginning because of certain other work. So you are most welcome. Kindly share your presentation. Do we have presentation here? Acha, he will share from there. So please share your presentation, and then let's try to restrict ourselves to 12 to 15 minutes. Maximum.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much,
Yeah.
Dr. Rajiv. And I'm very much sorry for having these very bad manner. But yeah, thank you for allowing me to talk about the system approach for the cities. Now this is a joint research with Ryoko Nakano, my colleague. So I just show the overview. So now there are so many low carbon community or smart cities, or in Japan, we call it decarbonizing leading areas. And also India, I know you have a smart city, so many smart city programs are there. So there are kind of advantage and also challenges. And then now we have several successful cases in a bit small scale one, but for large scale or just the Dr. Rajiv mentioned for like system thinking, we may lose the very good cases. We have only like a single solution type approach at this moment. So then how we have a synergy type or multi-benefit type city development, this is our question. Now Japan started the new program on decarbonization leading areas. So then we try to develop the carbon-free area by 2030. And then totally Japanese government would like to select more than 100 sites in Japan. There are many variety of the locations. This is a case of the residential zone. So there are many technology, but we need to carefully choose what kind of technology we may apply for each area. I will share this slide later. 2 days ago, I was in the KL, Kuala Lumpur city, to organize a high-level talks on a zero carbon city and Kuala Lumpur, together with the mayor of Kuala Lumpur city. And so we started this project since 2019, and then Ryoko Nakano is the right hand up, and then we have a 3 years project at this moment, and then we are having kind of the activity to raise up the high top-down the engagement, also the international collaboration, because we have a COP26 last year. And then KL also declared like 30% renewable electricity for the all the use. So it's quite challenging with the target, but it's a mayor's commitment. So this kind of commitment is also very important, not only the talk, not only the discussion. And so we share these kind of the initiative at the Glasgow COP. And then now for this KL, Kuala Lumpur city, declared that they will choose like a district approach too. It's quite similar to the decarbonizing leading areas. We had a site visit yesterday, and then yeah, many things are happening like waste management or like a rooftop solar, or also riverside lighting for not only the energy but also safer reason. So this is a joint work between among the like KL city, also a Tokyo Metropolitan Government, a Saitama City, or a private company, or a national agency. So this kind of joint collaboration is quite important. And then last month, I just also supported organize a third climate and SDGs synergy conference in Tokyo. It's convened by the UNDESA and also UNFCCC. Because now synergy is quite important to having like a post-2030 issues. So we have something successful meeting, but it's quite important to have how to continue our journey, not only the climate issue, but also nature, as the Dr. Rajiv mentioned. So I think climate and nature synergy is quite key because we have a COP27 on November, and also biodiversity COP15 on December. How we have a climate and nature synergy on the scale of the city. So this is the end of my slide. So thank you very much, and so sorry for interrupting all of you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fujino. It very beautifully and very effective manner you have shared the case study as well as the very concept of carbon neutral cities, and then absolutely the word is the synergy, which you say synergy with nature is absolutely essential when we look at these kind of issues. So thank you once again for joining us and sharing your thoughts.
My colleague Ryoko Nakano kindly joined the session by the end. So if you have any question, please do the question or comment to my colleague Ryoko Nakano. Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Anyone have a question? So we now proceed to the second speaker, and I request Mr. Rahul Sachdeva from National Institute of Urban Affairs, Government of India, Delhi, to share his thoughts and experience about managing urban rivers. I briefly mentioned about when given the example of city and nature, the river came prominently. But here, to know exactly what is happening, how we can actually look at least water, river, biodiversity, and city together, the two elements, and factoring people also in between. So we have Rahul with us to share his presentation, his experience. Rahul, please.
Hello. Yeah. Am I audible? Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you, Rajiv, sir. Thanks for giving me this opportunity to speak here in this forum. So the presentation, what I'm going to talk today is what sir kind of, mentioned in his early talk is about, the work that we are recently doing in the field of managing urban rivers. So as we all know, rivers are, cradle of civilization, and there's a strong bond between cities and the people because rivers provide a host of ecosystem services, which is essential for the sustenance. But now when we typically talk about rivers, we talk at basin scale. But when we talk about the health of the rivers, it is widely seen that the largest kind of the impact which is given back to the rivers is by the cities. So how we manage this urban, the river stretches within the cities, I think that's a new emerging area in which NIUA is working along with National Mission for Clean Ganga. And I'm going to share the framework that we have developed, which helps cities in owning the responsibility and managing their urban river stretches so that we have healthy rivers which can support in sustaining our lives. So just to start, I want to share this slide in which it's a very widely acknowledged paper by Tickner et al., in which if you see in terms of the global freshwater biodiversity, and because under SDG, if you see the goal 15, which talks about the conservation of biodiversity, if you see the business as usual scenario, if nothing is being done, then if you see the freshwater biodiversity is kind of declining, which in a way is one of a very key indicator of healthy river ecosystem. And if you are not doing anything, if you see along the time, the quality of the water and the health of the river would deteriorate. But if, if we want to reverse this trend, and if we want to, bend this trajectory, a lot of, actions that needs to be done, which they have proposed a couple of actions ranging from, implementation of environmental flows, then, improving the water quality, which is very kind of, obvious, protect and restore critical habitats, manage exploitation of species and riverine aggregates, prevent and control non-native species invasion, safeguard and restore freshwater connectivity. So they have given a kind of, a list of interventions which, if taken, then, this curve can be bent and rivers can improve. So our framework in many ways kind of, touch a lot of this topic in many aspects. So I will be talking about that framework in my coming slides, and then we can draw parallels. So for any kind of, new initiative, the pathway, it kind of, consists of three broad pillars. First of all, it requires enabling environment, because that's very much essential for any initiative to kind of, get its foothold. Then we talk about the various actors involved and the kind of linkages they share. So we talk about various institutional arrangement which is required to implement the initiative. And then there are management instrument which kind of provides a framework to all these actors to work within it. So in my talk here, we are talking because since, as I mentioned, this managing urban rivers is a new paradigm. First of all, we really need to have this enabling environment, the kind of, which gives a framework or which gives a guidance to the cities to how to move ahead. And as a part of this, we recently have developed a framework for managing urban river stretches, and it's called the Urban River Management Plan Framework. So in the picture, if you see in November 2020, we have launched this framework, and on the extreme right, you can see Shri Rajiv Ranjan Mishra sir. Yeah. So at the heart of it, the framework, if you see, it's an integrated approach to manage the river and its associated elements in a city in a sustainable manner. So if you see, there are certain words which are highlighted, and I would like to draw your attention on that. When we say integrated approach, it's again talk about various agencies which are engaged with rivers. So there could be flood control department, there could be irrigation department, there could be pollution department. So in that way, many departments have to come together when we talk about rivers. Integrated also means it's not only about, the planning part of it, but also, the projects on ground, the implementation of projects. When we talk about the associated elements, we are not talking river in isolation, but the ecosystem around it. So we also talk about water bodies, we talk about wetlands, and then we talk about natural drains, because they in many ways are kind of linked with each other. And when we talk about sustainably, this is the kind of, broad three elements based on which our entire framework is based. That's the environment, social, and the economic elements. So this framework, what I was talking about, the URMP framework, if you see, this is the overall framework. So the elements of the URMP, as I mentioned, the key elements of the URMP is based on three pillars. That is the environment, economic, and the social. For each of the elements, we have a vision. And for kind of, complying to that vision, we have a set of objectives, which I will be talking in subsequent slide. And to achieve those objectives, what are the kind of interventions a city can take? And then there will be followed by a monitoring and evaluation mechanism, so that, we can see how cities have been performing. And we can also do a kind of, a benchmarking that how across, different cities are performing based on this framework. And also the financing part of it, which is very important, because we talk a lot about intervention, but financing is equally important as to how, we can get this intervention implemented on ground. So this framework, what it happens is that, so it's a common framework which is applicable to all the river cities. So the elements, the vision and the objective part, I will mention ahead, that remains common for all the cities, as well as the monitoring and the evaluation mechanism. What differs at a city level is the intervention, because some cities would have intervention under some objectives, but maybe some other cities, would have a different set of intervention. And to do that, what kind of financing they can leverage upon might differ from a city to city. So there are certain elements which remain common, and there are certain elements which differ from a river city to a river city. So coming down to the vision, as I mentioned, for the three broad elements, for the environmental element, the vision here is that the river should be able to provide a habitat for biodiversity to thrive. So that's the vision statement. For the social element, the vision statement is the river will be celebrated among the citizen, which now in many ways, because your cities have turned their backs to the river and somehow that connect is lost. So how to bring people back to the river so that, they associate themselves, they recognize themselves, and then, they feel connected to this natural resource. And when it comes to the economic, we see that, how river can provide, opportunities for economic development. We do talk about agriculture, fisheries, which are typically linked with rivers, but then there are a host of different services which a city can leverage upon to, boost their economic development. So for each of this vision statement, for the environmental element, we have brought 6 objectives for the cities. So the first objective talks about the regulation of activities in floodplains, very important. Another part which is oftenly talked about in a major way is about, keeping rivers free from pollution. Because whenever we talk about the health of the river, the pollution is the only, aspect which we talk about. But managing urban rivers is beyond, controlling the pollution. There are other aspects as well. The third objective is how we can rejuvenate the water bodies and wetlands, which I mentioned in my earlier slide, because it's an ecosystem. So you have to deal with them in a connected manner. Then we talk about the enhancing the riparian buffer of the river, because that's a continuous stretch of vegetation along the length of the river, which provides a host of benefits to the cities. Then to adopt increased reuse of treated wastewater, because whatever water we take from river, but then we pollute it and send it back. So how we can treat this and reuse so that our dependence on freshwater sources is minimized to a great extent. And the last one is to ensure maximum good quality return flow. So when we take water from river, it's also important that a certain volume of that is given back so that the e-flow, the environmental flow of the river is maintained. So these are the 6 objectives under the environment element. When we come to economics, so there are 2 objectives: develop eco-friendly river fronts. As you see, many cities are now looking at developing the river fronts, but how to make them eco-friendly is not just a concrete structures, but also the services around it, how it is embedded so that it's not harming the ecosystem. So it's about that. Another objective is to leveraging on the economic potential of the river, how cities can look into different avenues. When it comes to the social, there are 2 objectives. The 9th objective talks about inculcating the river-sensitive behavior among citizens so that they feel responsible towards rivers. And the last objectives talks about that how we can engage citizens this entire process of river management so that they feel that strong connect. So this is the kind of the heart of the URMP framework, what I'm talking about, 10 objectives, and the cities have to plan interventions across these 10 objectives so that the river stretches flowing through these cities are maintained in a healthy manner. So when we had created this framework, so it's not only about providing this enabling framework, but also working with cities. So we have taken this framework and we prepared the URMP plan for Kanpur. So the Kanpur is the first city in India which has its plan based on this framework. And this was launched on 25th November 2021. And on this same day, what Rajesh sir was mentioning in his talk earlier, so we have created a River Cities Alliance of 30 river cities from Ganga Basin as well as from non-Ganga Basin. And the idea of this platform is to bring all the river cities together, provide them a platform to engage in discussion, share their experiences. And NIUN, NMCG, as a host of this alliance, we work with them, we conduct capacity building programs, we provide them technical support and do the hand holding so that all these cities, then they go back and then they work on their stretches of rivers and make them healthy. So these are the some of the interventions that we have done for Kanpur. Quickly, okay. So maybe I don't go into each of this intervention, but the whole idea is maybe I will just touch upon one of the interventions. So Kanpur has a good kind of a GIS database on the water bodies. So they have mapped water bodies, but beyond that they don't have a database which can really help a decision maker in kind of planning interventions around it, that how to rejuvenate them. So one of the interventions what we have mentioned is that what kind of a database can be put into place. So there are a set of this data points which a city can collect, and then they integrate as a part of the GIS and can have a comprehensive map and a plan for water body rejuvenation. In the same way, we have another intervention in which we have identified stretches of the river in the city where the riparian stretches can be maintained. Because many point you can see the development coming to the edge of the river, then there is no scope of doing it. But there are still many segments in which we can have this riparian, which can help in maintaining the health of the rivers. So in that way, we have interventions planned, and Kanpur is now taking those forward and implementing on ground. So yeah, in nutshell, this is the framework that we have developed, and we are moving ahead, and we are supporting more cities like Ayodhya, Prayagraj, Bareilly, Moradabad. We are working with them and preparing urban river management plan, which kind of become reference projects for other cities to follow. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rahul, for sharing the developments on managing urban river and an example that how we can develop certain tools and framework which brings this kind of systems thinking or integrated thinking at the city level, joining them with the nature and people. So now I think I'm really very sorry to rushing through, because even if we are trying to do it fast, still we are actually going behind the timeline, but I cannot also rush it so that it does not make sense. So I think we have to be also a little balanced. So I think, can you tell Mr. Fredman is there? He's joined, na? So may I invite Mr. Dor Fredman, IIASA Israel Water Program Scholar. Are you online, Mr.
Yes.
Fredman?
Yes. Hello.
So I request you to share your thoughts briefly to the conference so that we can all be benefited.
Yeah, let me share my screen. Can you see my screen now? Can you hear me and see my screen?
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Great.
Please.
So, good morning. Thank you for having me here online. I would like to share my, coming from this kind of hydrological modeling perspective, I would like to share my thoughts on the link between urban sustainability and the water, and also a bit of other system, and focusing on wastewater treatment. So quite trying to link it also to the last talk. When thinking of urban system, our current perspective is mostly of this kind of urban linear economies. So we have inputs from one side entering cities, then they're being processed by people living in the cities, and we have some outputs. So the outputs can be, for example, wastewater or sewers. Then we spill it into the environment, and the outcome would be environmental pollution in rivers, for example. A more circular economy way of seeing things would be to take these sewers that go out of cities and treat them, like in wastewater treatment plants, and then we can, if we want, discharge them back into the rivers as clean water, so a bit of natural protection, but we can also reuse them for irrigation of food crops or other crops, so increasing food security and safety back to these populations that living in the cities. Also, we can relax our pressures on natural resources. So the potential on a global scale, the potential for reusing wastewater is quite big. If we just look at the numbers, currently global crop irrigation demand is estimated for almost 900 cubic kilometers per year, and we currently estimate to generate approximately 40% of it by wastewater globally. But we only reuse 5% of these, we only irrigate 5% of this global crop irrigation, or only reuse 5% of this global crop irrigation with from our wastewater. So there is this gap we can close and increase our use of this unused resource. And it's also more than just water. So wastewater can be used for irrigating quite a lot of cropland, but we can also use the nutrients in wastewater to reclaim and then replace some of the nutrients we apply to our fields. And we can also reclaim energy in sludge, in these resource. So globally estimated, we can provide the consumption of almost 160 million households in 2015. And this all goes back to the population in the city that requires these resources, requires the energy, requires the food, requires the clean water. So the question is, how can we plan for it, or what tools do we have to plan for it? And here I just want to share a new tool that we are developing in IIASA within a hydrological model. So in hydrological modeling, the tendency from this large-scale hydrological modeling towards the local, from relatively coarse resolution of 60 kilometers to this high and hyper resolution up to 1 to 2 kilometers. And these trends allow us to better represent the human and water interface. Yet it requires data on local conditions and data on human management. The recently published community water model a few years ago has this hyper spatial resolution of 1 kilometer, and it can simulate multiple human and natural processes in the hydrological cycle, and becoming really relevant for urbanized areas. Within this model, we've developed recently this wastewater module. So it basically has 3 stages. So first, we generate wastewater out of urban systems. So we have like consumption of households and industries which generate wastewater, and sometimes urban runoff also goes to the source. So we also take this and we collect it into wastewater treatment facilities. These can be either intensive wastewater treatment plants or extensive wastewater treatment plants. And then we can either discharge it back into the river, or we can store it and reuse it for irrigation or for other uses. So this is the main processes in this module. I would like to sum up with some illustration for Israel. So one basin in Israel. This is the Ayalon River Basin, located here in Israel, in the center of Israel. It is quite an urbanized basin. So all these gray spots you see are urban areas, and this one that I marked with my pointer now, this is the part of the Tel Aviv-Jaffa metropolitan area, which populates basically almost 40% of the population of Israel. So this is half of it, the bottom half. We have some rural areas as well, the kind of mixed cities and villages with cropland. These orange spots are cropland. And then the wastewater from Tel Aviv is being collected and actually sent outside of the basin, exported from the basin to a quite big agricultural area in Israeli terms here in the south, so around 80 kilometers. And these are wastewater that are being exported from the region and reused somewhere else, and then the food comes back and sent into cities. And some other wastewater generated in this region are treated and reused locally. So the idea was to simulate these processes within Sivatem to allow to learn about them a bit more. This is the consumption in the Ayalon Basin over a period of 6 years, more or less. And what you can see here on the red outputs part of the circle is this approximately half of the water inputs into consumption ends up as sewers, and then approximately quarter are being used in domestic and industrial consumption, and the other quarter for irrigation. These sewers then being sent to the wastewater treatment plants and being either exported, as we saw earlier with this map, that we send the water somewhere else to be reused outside of this little watershed. And some of them are treated locally. This is this part over here, and some are being discharged or uncollected. So this is the wastewater treatment module main results. Then we also take the third phase, and we want to reuse them. So some of them are being exported, but the treated locally part is going to a reservoir or a set of reservoirs. So around approximately half of the water that input into the reservoir are from wastewater treatment plants. And these treated wastewater are then being abstracted from the reservoir, or part of them are being abstracted and sent into the water mix of consumption. And there is just restricted for irrigation. So eventually around of 20% of the irrigation water comes from treated wastewater, and the rest come from a mix of groundwater and some external water being sent to this region. And then also it goes beyond just irrigation. So this story about the link between urban system, water system, and other system like the food system is just not only about irrigation, but also about, for example, resource reclamation. So here I show just it's a planned methods and implementation of this wastewater treatment module for the Yangtze Basin in China, which is kind of a big scale implementation. And here we plan also to include these nitrogen and phosphorus loadings into water and then removal outside from the water in the wastewater treatment plant, and then are being removed mostly to sludge, which is a byproduct of this treatment process. And then the water can go to reservoirs and used for irrigation, but the nutrients can go to sludge and then treated and reused as fertilizer as crops. So we can see also the potential for nutrients recovery, not only for this water recovery. To sum up, so we have just two opportunities and challenges. Mainly the main opportunities with this new module combined within an hydrological model is to help us planning for sustainable water management, and particularly, I guess, in an urbanizing world where wastewater becoming much more crucial for the environment and also becoming much more important as an alternative resource. And of course, under climate change, where water becoming a bit scarcer. And also it would allow us to apply a nexus approach. So this human, water, food, energy nexus that we can that I've started to show with this Yangtze method that we plan to apply. Still some challenges remain. We need to create now a global high resolution data set, make it available, and some data inputs are still not available. So this, for example, reuse of wastewater by sector is something that is not yet available at the global scale, and storage capacity for wastewater is not there. And I think more from the theoretical level, which is also quite interesting, the effects of wastewater irrigation on crop yields, soils, and food safety and other dimensions are not yet clear. So much more research should focus on this to allow us to better represent this system. Yeah, this is by me. If you would like to test our model, this is free of an open source model. You can just use this link. And if you have questions, I would be happy to accept them by chat, email, or after this session. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you so much for presenting a very interesting model and really making wastewater as part of the overall hydrological cycle. And also, I think it very clearly shows that wastewater is not really wastewater, it's unused water and can be used further for several useful purposes. India also actually has a lot of success stories, but still a long way to go, as you also have shown. And a national framework for reuse of treated wastewater is in progress, as well as several models for circular economy also is going on. We would be very happy to maybe from the NIUA side to get connected with you and get your presentations and details and maybe take it forward. In India also, the Israel Water Center is also working with us. So a lot of experience from Israel we are getting through setting up of the Center of Excellence in Agriculture and Water. So I think the collaborative framework is already existing. So we can certainly take it forward. Thank you once again for a good presentation. And now I go to Professor Bidhi Avasia from IIM Ahmedabad and request you, ma'am, to please come and share your thoughts. She is going to tell us about urban transitions and systems approach. Thank you. Please, ma'am.
Is my presentation visible?
Yes, yes, we can see it.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, Chair. Uh, I would, good afternoon, everyone, and I would like to just clarify that I'm a researcher at IIM Ahmedabad, a postdoctoral researcher and not a professor, but thank you so much. And I'd like to thank the organizers for this opportunity to make a presentation here at the conference on urban transitions. So in the interest of time, I'll skip a few things because we've heard systems approach and all, and how it's when you view cities through a systems lens, it's more like a complex system of interdependent subsystems, right? So which determines your physical infrastructure, socio-cultural behaviors, economic flows, material flows, etc. And then moving to urban transition. So because of the rapid urbanization that is happening and the impacts of climate change that we see, there is a need for sustainable urbanization. And hence there is a higher need to understand how urban transitions are happening. In case we obviously want to look at enhancing resilience or adaptive capacity, right, as a response to the impacts of climate change. And when we talk about urban transitions, again, they would be across various systems, whether it's transport system, whether it's the ecosystem and green and open spaces, etc. So the most crucial factor here is the spatial transitions that are happening within the urban areas, the way cities are extending, the way urban spaces are changing. And hence these spatial land use transformations have a lot of significance in the environmental concerns that we talked about. The chair also mentioned about the blue and green, right? So that also has an inherent link here. And if these transitions are not taken care of, they may have potential damaging implications for the sustainability and the resilient development of the future cities. So in order to look at these transitions and the land use system in a city and its cascading effects on the other systems, we'll first try to understand how spatial transitions are happening. So this is a study we undertook where we've mapped 47 cities across the tier sizes and climate zones over 3 decades to understand how land use has changed. This is Landsat data, so we've mapped each pixel within the municipal boundaries of these cities and see how agriculture spaces have gone down, how built up spaces have gone up and all. But if we zoom into these statistics that you see on the right side of the graph, you would see what is moving where, right? So the most frequent transition that's happening is agriculture to built up spaces, agriculture to green spaces, agriculture to open spaces. Also green spaces being converted to built up spaces, open spaces being converted to built up spaces, etc. So, and when we looked at these cities and the kind of regulations they have, the kind of zoning parameters they've put in, etc., we do find that a lot of horizontal spread is happening in India, which is taking up a lot of this land because there's low-rise built spaces that are coming up. And this has a cascading effect on a couple of parameters which amplify the implications of climate change. So we start with an example of urban flooding here. So how does land use change or the way spatial transitions are happening impact the flooding in a city? And mind you, this is not riverine or coastal flooding. We are just concentrating on localized flooding incidences in the city. So what we here find that as the land use shares change, for a given city at a particular rainfall level, the occurrence of flooding situations would also change, right? We did an exercise to map 30-year past data for 42 cities as to what were the flooding incidences using newspaper articles as our major source, whatever got reported, and tried to see how this would change in the future, projecting it up to 2050 under 3 different RCP scenarios as well as 3 different built-up scenarios. So the first one is the business as usual scenario, where we say that the built-up area has been growing in a certain way in a city and it will continue growing that way. The second is a tiered growth, where we put up assumptions that the tier Y and Z cities, the smaller cities, will follow the routes, the paths that the bigger cities have already followed. So that's another. The third is a sustainable development scenario where we say that the built up shares within the spatial spaces in the cities will be very different from what they are right now. It doesn't mean there's a lot of deconstruction. It means that a lot of compact growth may happen, and this would roughly simulate a situation of the land use that these cities would have had in the 1970s, 80s somewhere, right? So when we looked at under various RCPs, we do see that when the green blue spaces are higher, irrespective of your RCP or the impact, the city is capable of holding on that water. The share of flooding days drastically reduces once you have better land use shares in the city, right? So there are various adaptation measures that could come in here. One, insurance coverage, of course, then building preventive infrastructure. But the most important that comes out of this is controlled planning. And like the chair mentioned, the way you do your master plans, that would have a long lasting impact on the way your cities would react to these implications of climate change. The second example we are using here is also linked to spatial transitions, but in terms of heat and temperature changes. So for an example city, we tried to see how temperatures are different in different land use mix situations between summer and winter, and we do see that there is actually a huge difference in the temperature. So somewhere wherein there was an open built up mix, the temperatures were, and these are land surface temperatures, are around 48. They're 3 degrees cooler near the city, sorry, the river. And so using this information, the land surface temperature data and ward level land use breakups, what we did for a particular city was try to map the share of built up spaces in the ward and the relative risk of mortality using the number of deaths that have happened in the city over past 15 years. We've tried to see how the relative risk changes as your built up to non-built up share changes at different temperature levels. So at 35 degree, the risk is 1, which is almost non-existent. When your built up is around 54% to 46% non-built up ratio. Same goes for 40 degrees. It's roughly the similar, but when we move to a 45 degree world, what happens is your built up spaces have to drastically go down and your green spaces have to drastically go up for your relative risk to remain 1, right? So at a 50-50 situation, your relative risks move from 1 to 1.1 roughly. Also looking at this from a gender, age and income point of view, because cities also have these socioeconomic parameters to them. And we do see that female above 75 living in a slum, essentially a low income area, is much more vulnerable. So the relative risk of this female and attributable mortality to the temperature is much higher compared to a male in the age range of 15 to 65 and not living in a slum, right? So the housing conditions also have an impact. So when we say land use change, and not only in this sense, it has an impact on your health systems, it also has an impact on the housing systems, etc. So that is how I just wanted to portray how these systems are interrelated and how a modification in one could actually have amplified implications for the other. Thank you so much. I hope I didn't consume a lot of time.
Thank you. Very nicely you have brought this transition and the interplay, which I was also talking about, nature, city, as well as society or the people. So very nice concepts. We will certainly like to see it in more detail and all that. But as you know, time is really very short in this session, and we have excellent presentation from to come from 3 more people. So I think again all future speakers, once again I will request you to share the key ideas from your slides, because I know whenever we make slides, few slides are always introductory in nature. So leave that and then come to the key points you want to convey to us so that we can get maximum benefits. Thank you, Vidhi. So now I request Sri Satya Prakash. He is PM Research Fellow in Solid Waste and Structural Chemistry in IISc Bangalore. He is going to share his thoughts about urban heat island phenomena in Bangalore. We have got 2 presentations related with Bangalore, so we'll take this and then go to the next, who is presently here. I am taking a lot of liberty in calling him towards end because he is very much here, and I am trying to have a mix between speakers online and speakers who are present here. So Mr. Satya Prakash, if you are ready, kindly straight away go to your presentation and share your key ideas.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you so much for providing me this opportunity. And sir, my slides are visible. Just confirm from
Yeah,
your.
we can see it. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. So today I'm going to present on my views on the urban heat island phenomena and air quality in Bangalore, India, learning from COVID-19 led restriction on anthropogenic activities. So. Sir, just a second, my slides are not moving. So as we all know that COVID-19 pandemic has impacted very badly to the jobs, to the economic loss and agriculture loss. These things have happened. But meanwhile, COVID-19 pandemic situation has also impacts positive impacts on the environment. So what we are trying to understand that due to this pandemic, we are trying to understand that what are the changes happening during this lockdown and what are the learning behind from this lockdown. So first, we have tried to understand the pattern of urban heat island, air quality, and relationship of air quality with UHI with air quality and land use. So as we all know that, we have selected that the study area is Bangalore region, which is one of the biggest mega cities of India, and it is growing rapidly, growing over the years, and now it's also planning to accumulate 20.3 million people by 2031, and almost the daily growth of the city is approx 80,000 meters square of the build-up area. And Bangalore Development Authority is also planning to increase the residential land use from 17.63% to 48.03% by 2031. So these are one of the major concern issues of the urbanization happening in Bangalore cities. But if you are thinking about the future, how we can compromise with all these things, how we can think in the sustainability way. So as we all know, the new IPCC report is the red code for human life, and IPCC AR6 report has also emphasized the importance of green cover water bodies in urban areas to control the urban heat island effects. They also want that unless there are immediate, rapid, and large scale reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, limiting warming to close to 1.5 degrees Celsius or even to 2 degrees Celsius will beyond reach. And according to the Green India mission, they had also accomplished a target of 2.5 million tons of carbon by 2020 to 2030 by conserving the ecosystem. The point is that how we can conserve the ecosystem if urbanization is happening in this way, how we can control and how we can conserve our water bodies, our forest and biodiversity in everything. So these things also needs to be a focus that land surface temperature, urban heat islands, it's also a basic and need points for the understanding the urbanization pattern. So this is the land cover of the study location, where build-up areas is around 56.84%, vegetation is around 12.33%, and water bodies is around 0.676% only, and fallow and barren is approx 13.6%, and roads and other features are 16.14%. So we here we have selected 5 major UHI regions. So this UHI region is the major most valuable economically and developed infrastructure cluster of the Bangalore region. So UHI 1 region is Thanisandra Nagadra research towns. UHI 2 has Puram, Hudi, then third one Central Business District, Kadirguppe, Nandahalli, then similarly Pinya and Nagarbavi. So we have selected these regions which are the most economically and functionally important. So, so during this pandemic, so we have assessed the land surface temperature for 3 dates: pre-lockdown, lockdown first week, and lockdown third week. So, what we observed, there are not a major changes in the land surface during only with these months, but there are some bitable changes which can be seen. So if you see the LST on the 15 March 2020, the higher LST temperature is around 47. Then again, it's 31st of March, which is lockdown period. In lockdown period, it's also increased up to 49.2 point. But after that, the strict lockdown is follows from the April 1st. Then 16th of April 2020, the higher temperature is little bit reduced. So the green patches, which are the which shows the low LST, the almost in the 31st March is almost it's vanished, but in this 16th of April 2020, it's little bit it can be observed. So according to the we also assess the heat island and cold island in Bangalore region. So these red patches are the urban heat island, and the green one is the urban cold island. So as what we have observed, the urban heat island is not vary from the very much variation has been observed, but as we can see, the intensity UHI intensity is almost getting decreased during these lockdown phases. So maybe there is a major phenomena of the lockdown effect. Maybe there is a kind of activity due to the shutdown of all industries and activities. So that's why the UHI intensity is little bit decreased. So here we have also did one study, the environmental impact of COVID-19 led lockdown, a satellite database assessment of air quality in Indian megacities. So we have did these studies for 5 major megacities of the India: Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, Kolkata, Chennai. So what we have observed that here, so a decrease in concentration of air pollutants, specifically NO2 and SO2, has been observed during the lockdown periods, where 7 AOD have exhibited discrete pattern of spatio-temporal variation. 4 mega cities except Kolkata have revealed a positive correlation between the NO2 concentration and population density. So, and NO2 column concentration depicted a significant decrease in the year 2024 Bangalore, and in Delhi it was very high in both of the studied months, and it was reduced less than half in the month of April 2020. SO2 measurements have been observed the highest in Chennai from March 2020 to April 2020. So basically the point is that all the pollutant matter, pollutant what we have studied, these are the like NO2 has drastically very highly reduced, and carbon monoxide has also reduced, and but SO2 and AOD has also reduced, but SO2 has not reduced that much.
Try to be little quick, Mr. Satyaprakash.
Okay, sir. Okay. So so here what we have tried to understand the impact of population density on NO2 levels. So what we have observed the relationship what we have observed in 2009 at business as usual period, but in the lockdown period it will be reduces. So it will be just because of the lockdown effect maybe, and the shutdown of all industries and factories. So we have studied the all the NO2 as major pollutants of the for 4 megacity, which shows the variations here. As we can see in this slide, the NO2 had drastic, almost it's vanished in 2020 and in April 2020. It cannot be seen. The only thing is AOD is little bit, its fluctuation is high in April 2020 as compared to 2019, April 2019, the same, but in April 2020 it's little bit high. So after that, we have tried to investigate the relationship, the a relationship with the urban heat island and NO2 and AOD. So whatever we have observed, these are the variations are happening due to the lockdown thing, where the NO2 has reduced, AOD has reduced. But think is point, what are the learnings from from COVID-19 19 what are the learnings from the COVID-19 led lockdown? So a few consideration is like maybe the monitoring and assessment is necessary, source attribution, sector specific actions for industries, then land use planning, micro level planning for high risk planning districts, synergies of land use planning with air quality profile, water bodies, drainage, topography, etc. Then green patches, location, high risk buildings, restoration of water bodies, these things needs to be considered. Then public awareness, emission reduction, fuel efficiency, public transport, how we can use the electricity vehicles, so reduce the emissions. Then regulation and incentives, protecting urban forest and water body emission standard building norms. Then strict implementation and monitoring, penalty and incentive imposition. Then green infrastructure is one of the major things that we need as country needs at this present condition, to build green building codes, incentive carbon credits, low albedo building material for public infrastructure to reduce the emissions. As government wants to reduce the emissions, but we have to think in this think in this approach, and we have to also think on the climate based smart livelihood pattern. We have to also think on that way. Nowadays climate change is happening, but we are also we always talking about the climate change, but we are never talking about the climate shift. Due to this lockdown, climate shift is happening. So but it shows a positive impacts on the environment, so we have to also think some of the consideration, and this way we have to, and so we can make our future more we can reduce our carbon emissions, so we can go for a better energy environment, and better plantation, better forest, and better biodiversity, etc. Thank you. So these are the research publications which are published due to this COVID-19, and one of the research articles are under review, and all these four are published. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Satyaprakash, for interesting thoughts and very interesting study, and also your link with the smart livelihood pattern and impact of climate. So we take that thought and go ahead. And next I call Mr. Sahil Matthew. He is a researcher at Center for Study of Science, Technology and Policy, C-STEP, Bangalore, Karnataka. And he is actually going to talk to us about Bangalore's water governance. And something very interesting is the complex adaptive system. I think that is perhaps the heart of, I told you about the systems thinking and then the learning thing. So adaptive nature, as the problem changes, the solutions also have to keep on, we have to keep on finding new solutions. So I think let's go to Mr. Matthew. And as you have seen, being very much here about the time constraints, so I need not remind you about the time constraints. So you are part of this group. So kindly.
Hello. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm well aware we're into our lunchtime, so I'm going to try and keep this as concise and short as possible. I'm Sahil Matthew. I'm currently an analyst at CSTEP Bangalore, as was mentioned. I'm part of a group that looks at risk analysis and adaptation for climate change. But this small talk that I'm going to give now is a research outcome from my graduate thesis, which was based at CPACT and Shiv Nadar University, which was primarily a COVID lockdown archival-based study that I took into the evolution of Bangalore's water governance and essentially looking at it through a qualitative complex adaptive systems approach. Well, 15 minutes is not a lot of time, or 10 minutes rather, is not a lot of time to get into the weeds of the research, but I will rather present this as a sort of narrative that shows Bangalore's water governance from a complex adaptive system approach that's guided by very potent human-nature relationships to one that is completely broken today. Oops, this doesn't seem to be moving. Okay, I'll just do it like that. So Bangalore's water woes are not foreign to anybody. It's international news at this point, with lakes spontaneously combusting. These are news articles that have now been featured in international newspapers. The city has highly depleted aquifers. We have borewells that are ranging to about 1,000 to 1,200 feet. In many areas, and a city that is now infamous for its water mafia that controls prices and has got many elite apartments and societies at its mercy. Taps that run dry regularly during the summers from insufficient water supplied from the KRS reservoir built to supply the city with surface water. And a city that has historically never actually flooded is now seeing a slew of flooding. Which is a phenomenon that's been happening over the last 5 to 10 years. But Bangalore, as an urban settlement, was not always like this. It was an urban settlement that did manage to adapt and live within biophysical confines. No civilization has flourished without building relationships around water, in whatever form they may be. And what we know today is that cities, including Bangalore, are characterized by large inflows of water from distant reservoirs placed outside in the hinterlands, and an almost equally large outflow of wastewater. Close to about 70 to 80% of water that the city encounters is an outflow of wastewater. I should correct that to used water. And the water crisis that we face today is not a simple crisis, but one that is representative of a changing relationship around water, where biophysical limits placed by the city are ignored and rather is exported to the hinterlands, and the city is now being governed by the water in the city is just being governed by the economy that places itself out of this biophysical limit. So before we get into Bangalore, just a short brief about complex adaptive systems. These are essentially systems that have multiple interconnected agents who behave according to their own rules and norms and eventually interact with each other and display behavior that is greater than the sum of the whole. And ideally, these agents are divided into two. They're reactive and adaptive agents, and I'll get into that a little later. And complex adaptive systems generally feature three key features of aggregation, anticipation, and adaptation, where aggregation displays emergent behavior outside the life of a single agent. Anticipation is where CAS uses its own internal models to understand the consequences of its present actions on the future. And adaptation, where rules of operation among agents are constantly revised. There is no macro endpoint in a CAS system. The system is constantly evolving. So I'll quickly go through Bangalore's biophysical characteristics. The city is quite unique. It's placed 900 meters above sea level and is divided into two watersheds, one that empties into a river that hugs the city from the west, and another, the Arkavati, that hugs the city towards the east. And Bangalore does not have any perennial water resources that run through the city. It has only two smaller streams towards outside the city's confines. And in terms of its geography, it has a mix of a highly undulating terrain towards the western part and a more flatter Maidan, as we call it, towards the eastern half of the city. And being in the center of a triangular plateau, it receives rainfall from both the southwest monsoon and the northeast monsoon, along with occasional thunderstorms from the Arabian Sea. And if we look at the rainfall historically, it has one that's not really changed too much, and rather in the 21st century has actually, in fact, even increased a little bit. And this the relationship Bangalore has with its rainfall and compared to other cities puts the city of Bangalore in what is called the eastern arid zone. So here's where the tank building essentially starts. With no perennial rivers that are running through the city, the early settlers basically had one choice for sustenance, that is to harvest rainfall. So the undulating surfaces towards the western half of the city collects rainwater and becomes drains during the monsoons. And what the settlers had then figured out is that the combination of drains that are bringing monsoon waters plus the geology of the city, which generally has very hard crystalline rocks, makes for a good storage unit. If you essentially bund the streams, bunding plus relatively impermeable rocks below can store water easily. And these tanks were built as a network. They weren't tanks that were built in isolation, but tanks that were connected to each other. And within networks, you could have between 2 and 200 tanks. And essentially, the way these were constructed is as a cascade where you have water flowing from one network to tanks below via gravity. So essentially, the waters would empty out from tanks from the northwest of the city towards the southeast, and finally empty out into the rivers that hug the city from the outside. So what we see for the most part is that the ingenuity of the network cascade-based tank construction was not one that was dictated by an external agency. It wasn't one that was dictated by a ruler, by a nation state, or anything, but one that emerged through self-organization of the settlers. Furthermore, a network of tanks is one that is an emergent property of the system. If we essentially, the map on the right is an old 1792, one of the oldest maps of Bangalore that shows the interconnected tanks, roughly drawn on paper. If we essentially zoom into one tank, we can call that an agent, we would essentially just see a tank of water, some fields, but no indication of a complex cascading network. A network emerges out of independent connections between these tanks. Therefore, it's only when we zoom out and we see the network property that we see the tanks as an emergent network property. To show the tanks, the density of the relationships that the tanks held within society, economy, and nature is well beyond the scope of the time we have. But to present a snapshot, the tanks had an ecology that was inbuilt within the city. It transported sediments. It had buffer zones where tanks used to be connected to each other with natural buffer zones. It had a deep, intimate connection with aquifers, with the tank supplying water to the aquifer below as groundwater, and groundwater supplying water to the tanks during other seasons. And in terms of agriculture, the tanks were split such that you have tanks, upper tanks that were used for silt collection, mid-range tanks that were used for domestic uses, and larger tanks below that were used for cultivation. And there existed cognizance among the farming community to use the tank bed that used to have fertile silt as fertilizer and as a bed for agriculture during drier seasons. Similarly, many other economic functions like the fisheries, the brick kilns, and the kitchen gardens existed because of the tank. They were all intimately connected with the tank being a central node in this relationship. And finally, the temples that played a very important part that stored agricultural produce that would come as an outcome of the tanks being used for agriculture. And the temples not only stored agricultural produce, but also mediated relationships between society and the tank by providing funds for tank construction, splitting roles for the maintenance for the tanks, and so on. So temples were not just agricultural storage units, but also one of social storage. So what we see is that the while we have all these entities below that are connected, it is not that they're just connected, but they have outcomes that feed back into each other and are highly codependent. For example, a simple brick kiln will not exist unless sediment is allowed to flow from one tank to be carried to another tank and so on. The tank occupying this central node in the social and economic sphere with multiple interconnected elements of agriculture, fisheries, and so on meant that the rules and norms for its governance emerged through the relationships the tank had with nature and society. The system as a whole would essentially, through feedbacks, function as adaptive systems where the emergent property of the system would change rules and norms depending on those outcomes. For example, the farmers, even during the British Raj, would refuse to plant cash crops for British revenue. It was an adaptive decision that was made based on the capacities of the tank, silt available, relationships with the temple, etc. So we have a situation where nature nor humanity ever reaches absolute sovereign authority, but continue to make and remake each other. And I'm quoting Harari here, where he uses his analogy of domesticating wheat, where he says that wheat essentially domesticated humans. Humans in many parts of the world were doing little else from dawn to dusk other than taking care of wheat plants. It wasn't easy. Wheat demanded a lot from them. Wheat didn't like rocks or pebbles, so humans broke their backs cleaning fields. Wheat didn't like sharing its space, water, and nutrients with other plants, so men and women spent long days weeding under the scorching sun. This demanded so much time that people were forced to settle next to wheat fields. Wheat didn't domesticate us. We didn't domesticate wheat. Wheat domesticated us, and such was the nature of the relationship between tanks and the city of Bangalore. And the British, at their entrance to the city, were also cognizant of this relationship that existed between the people and its tanks, where even as through their famine relief programs would try to put tanks within the existing network and ecology of the city, where they said they marveled at the ability of the city to harvest rainwater without wasting a drop. So as I'm going to start concluding from here on. So as the yes,
quite late.
Okay, I think I will then move on from here. I will move from here as well. Yeah. So the city today has a relationship that is basically non-existent with its tanks. About 60% of our water demand is imported as surface water from the KRS reservoir, with pumping head of up to 1,700 feet, which comes with a large ecological and energy cost. And what is ironic is that the imported water from the KRS reservoir is equal to the rainfall that falls over the city surface area. So essentially, the rainfall that could have been harvested and was harvested by the early settlers of the city is equivalent to the quantum of water that we are now importing from the KRS reservoir. And tanks within the city are now converted to bus stands, residential areas, and the rest are basically in disuse. So where does CAS feature? Essentially, the city has violated all social ecological principles in its urban growth. The present city is a reactive agent with rules and norms that are static, that do not react, that do not adapt to larger changes in the climate, to changes in the economy, and so on. A city that does not build its relationship around water will lose its adaptive capacities. And ideally, we have two choices going forward: a state-centric supply of water resources through large reservoirs, which is currently being worked around with the Meghdatu Dam and so on, or a more decentralized people-centric system of rainwater harvesting and aquifer recharge and so on, which can give us the same quantum of LPCD per day. And what we have now is that these tanks, as they served an agrarian purpose in the past, will no longer serve those domestic purposes. It is no longer directly going to give us drinking water. But with a rapidly changing climate, a new demography, we place new values on this tank. on the system of tanks. And it's incumbent on this new demography to start building a complex relationship with the tank system that will not resemble the relationship that existed in the past, but one that has now evolved to something different. Tanks will now be used for used water treatment, through constructive wetlands, through aquifer recharge programs, as tanks directly feed the aquifers of the city, and through urban heat island mitigation. The purpose of these new utility values is to create new relationships between the city and the tank system. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really fascinating. The way you have described from the traditional time and this, the pity is we didn't have time. Otherwise, I'm quite sure it has really provoked a lot of thought, and I'm personally quite keen to carry this dialogue with you subsequently, as this is my area of interest also. But now, as I am getting continuous alert signal from the organizers, I will have to move towards closing this session with the last speaker, Dr. Shreya Joshi Kanetkar. I invite Dr. Shreya. Little unfair for you, but now we are all prisoner of these circumstances. So please come and share your thoughts as briefly as possible. Dr. Shreya is researcher from Visvesvaraya National Institute of Technology, Nagpur, and she is going to talk about applying systems thinking for rural-urban resource resilience. Again, a very important, very critical area. Kindly.
I hope the screen is visible.
Yeah, it's visible. You can go ahead.
So this is one of the frequently discussed topic. I'll just go very quickly. I know we are at the crunch of the time. So this is a very frequently discussed topic, the rural and urban, and then their identities and functions and interactions. So starting with the perception of rural and urban, customarily, the urban areas have been identified based on the density of population and their corresponding economic activities, whereas rural are generally perceived as something that is superfluous to the urban. And although these two are geographically dispersed and are often described based on their contrasting yet complementary assets, they are functionally interdependent. And despite their interdependence, the inherent interaction patterns between the individual urban and rural areas do vary spatiotemporally. So therefore, it is important to understand that there cannot be a universal framework for evaluating the general system response under similar pretext. So the urban-rural or rural-urban, this term is explicitly emphasized mainly because we are looking at rural and urban as two mutually exclusive entities, like with two separate constitutions, two different functional setups, different behavioral patterns, and different priorities. So while we are saying urban rural or rural urban, it is different from what we refer to when we are talking about a metropolitan area or a region in ways such as the scale, the boundaries, the compositions, associations, so on and so forth. So when we are talking about rural urban, we are referring to the association of any urban area with its surrounding rural hinterlands, and then vice versa. We are talking about the linkages between these two entities, and not as a functional region just as in itself, but as rural urban counterparts. So although being discretely governed, urban and rural areas are closely knit through diverse spacious sectoral linkages. These linkages could be defined as symbiotic flows that occur between urban areas and their surrounding rural hinterlands that may include people, goods, waste, and finances or information. So in a broader context, the term resource can also not be limited to natural resource over the urban and rural areas, but it can also include human resources, finances, and so on. So overall, from the systems point of view, urban areas can essentially be perceived as nodes that offer services, communication technologies, knowledge networks, and an overall association with the national and global infrastructures. Whereas the rural areas provide the urban areas with food, water, energy, raw materials, and other ecosystem services. So if we talk in terms of systems, if the urban boundary is considered as one system interacting with the rural boundaries, another system, at a sectoral level, the linkages between these two systems could be described based on the functional links between the people, the activities, and the enterprises in different locations, and then there are also several subsystems within these larger systems interacting with each other, as well as with the subsystems beyond their system boundaries. So these subsystems may include anything from infrastructure to socio-economic and environmental subsystems and the governance networks. And further, the subsystems of the rural provide the feedback to the subsystems of the urban areas, and the subsystems of the urban also provide feedbacks to the subsystems of the rural areas. So now at a larger urban-rural scale, where there are complex interdependencies and several variables involved, the problems become very difficult to solve. It is difficult to define the boundaries and scope up to which we will be observing the interactions. Moreover, the trajectories of the growth are unpredictable, and the impacts of the actions may not be visible immediately. The reductionist approach in this case of such wicked problems, which seems like a quick solution, which isolates the problems from the complex systems in which they emerge and operate. So now, treating the observed symptom rather than addressing the root or the systemic causes certainly alleviates the immediate pains and offers short-term solutions, but it also tends to cause a rebound. Since this approach disregards the system failures that create the precursors for any issues and then later the issue in itself, it becomes essential to adopt an approach that recognizes that any issue starts within the system itself. For instance, let us consider an example of homelessness. It is an issue caused due to the failure in the provision of proper education, healthcare, or affordable housing and economic opportunities. All the precursors include poverty, housing vulnerabilities, and the substance abuse, domestic violence. So this indicates that homelessness is the product of multiple variables acting together within a larger system, say a city. So if we want to prevent the homelessness, we need to look at the city and the city subsystems. So why are they not working effectively? What paradigm or the power structures or the behavioral patterns are perpetuating the system failures? So what interventions are working to solve this system failures and so on? Now, the systems perspective in the context of resilience has often been associated with the socio-ecological systems. The principles of resilience thinking, in fact, advocate the use of adaptive systems thinking and talk about the management of variables and feedbacks. Now, the adaptability or the resilience to the unevenness in the availability or accessibility or quality of certain resources over the rural-urban continuum poses a complex set of challenges. For instance, water as a transboundary resource between the rural and urban areas is an issue that has been discussed frequently. The water stress that has been experienced in many parts can possibly be understood with respect to many variables, such as the technological capacities for treatment, the awareness and sensitivity of the users, the governance and the policy implementations, and so on. So in such case, systems thinking offers a broader perspective of functioning and influence of various actors. With the dynamics of socio-economic, environmental, and cultural scenarios, it is critical to realize how these systems respond under these circumstances. So this is the methodological approach that we have been adopting for identifying the actors and planning our interventions for water as a resource over the urban and rural boundaries. But still, there are two main challenges, again, with respect to defining the boundaries and the temporal impact. Although through the focus group discussions, we were able to realize the overall structure of functioning systems. It is the community, their preferences for adaptation, and their priorities that make all the difference. So yeah, the community consultation does form a very critical part of this methodology. So this case study is currently in progress for the case study area in the Nagpur district. Another study which also was conducted for the rural settlements of coastal areas in Andhra Pradesh, but with a different methodology, it has also revealed the importance of community consultations. So we will be discussing those in the coming sessions. So that brings us to the end of the discussion, and I'd like to quote one of the pioneers of the system thinking, Dr. Meadows, that makes so much sense and has frequently influenced my work. So we can possibly impose our will on a system. We can listen to what the system tells us and discover how its properties and our values can work together. to bring forth something much better than could ever be produced by our will alone. So that being said, I'd like to wrap up my presentation here. So thank you. I hope I did not take much time.
Thank you. Thank you for giving a good framework and very clearly talking about the complex interdependencies which are very much important through several examples and this urban-rural linkages. I think we have really ran short of time. I would have loved to give some concluding remark and reflect upon all the presentations together, but I will only say that we have to again look at all of it. You talked different aspects, different things. Some of you went into detail, some of you talked about how to solve it, some of you actually shared how tradition, how our ancient culture learned from nature, and they were able to assess the carrying capacity of natural system much better than what we are able to do with all the technological abilities of modeling and whatnot. So I think that humility to be with nature, live with nature, learn from them, and don't try to overrule nature. I think that is the one underlying thing which comes out of all these things. And I thank all the speakers for bringing different aspects of systems thinking which can go to a particular area of urbanization and challenges all put together, how we can bring system thinking to ensure that our urbanization, which is anyway going to take place faster, remains sustainable. Thank you one and all.
Thank you very much, sir. On behalf of TIFAC and ISA, we would like to felicitate you for being our honorable speakers. So first, sir, Rajiv Ranjan, sir, I would request you to just give them the token of appreciation to Sahil Matthew. And Rahul Sachdeva, sir. Now I would like to request Mr. Chakradhar sir to please. Sir. Sir. Thank you very much, sir. And sir, the lunch is ready, so we can like